September 9th together. Is there a seconder for the minutes? Moved and seconded. Are there any corrections, changes, amendments? Councillor Zelka, you look like you were just having a quick peek at something. Oh, okay. Good. Not seeing any other comments then. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. We then have receipt of committee minutes and public hearing reports. So we have advisory design panel and report of the public hearing. We get a motion to receive both of those. Moved and seconded. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Question. Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much, Chair. Much appreciate that. Regarding the advisory design panel minutes, this is 4.1 of July 5th.
Recording in progress.
There was reference made that the panel expressed, I don't know whether it was one or whether it was all, of certain concerns. One of them was that inclusion, that the uplands area be included for infill was one of the suggestions from the panel. And also that relaxation of requirements relating to parking. The question I have is, was it one? Was it two? Was it the entire panel? Was it unanimous? I can't tell from these minutes. Could staff help, please?
I'm going to go to Ms. Williams or to our liaison. Do we have Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship. I wasn't in attendance at the meeting, but the standards for minute taking require that more than one person have a discussion on the item before it's captured in the minutes. So I would assume that there was a discussion, and then it's considered to be the body's discussion. So we don't typically indicate the number of individuals who were concerned or not concerned on the matter.
Thank you. Councillor Zelka? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
If I can be of help on this particular question, there were 3 members at the meeting. Mr. Bull, correct me if I'm wrong, there were 3 members and myself at the meeting and staff as well. So there were sufficient members to have a discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, our microphones are getting a little echoey. We'll deal with it. Unfortunately, we can't really fix it in the course of the meeting here, I don't think, so we'll just try and move forward. So we just have a motion now to twist for receipt. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. We have Horizon report, and we're going to add another Horizon report from September the 9th. I have this here just to read aloud. It'll form part of the record. And that Horizon report was the council directs staff to request proposals for building envelope inspection, geotechnical inspection, and dockworks inspection to determine condition of installations and facilities that may impact continued use for the purposes intended. So if I could just get that's just added onto there. Do I need to have a motion to include that, or just as it's read into the record, we'll just have a motion to rise and report
Recording stopped.
all including that? Okay. So moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate that. The addition on the Rise report talks about the facilities, and it talks about continued purpose, but it doesn't say what it's about. Can we say what this is like? What facilities? What purpose? It is very unclear as to what this is for anyone other than us who don't know what this is about. Could we at least provide the context in terms of what it's related to?
Sure.
Thank you.
I don't think we can modify the Horizon report because there was a motion that was made. Perhaps, Mr. Coates, would it be appropriate for you just to speak in general terms about what the Horizon report is?
Mayor Murdoch, through you and 2 members of council. So yes, so just in general terms, staff try to encapsulate the intent of the thrust of council's decision. In this case, this was actually council's motion. I think perhaps what's missing here for clarity is the subject matter, right? And so I think just when this is recorded, republished on the agenda tomorrow, and then reflected in the minutes, the subject matter will be the marina lease as the topic.
Marina lease or marina facilities and dock works or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Very much appreciate that. Now it makes sense.
Any other discussion on the Horizon report? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. We have next Mayor's remarks. I just want to make sure anybody who's interested in speaking in the public participation and comment question period coming up next. If you have questions that you would like to ask, points, this is the time. If you're calling into the 1855 number, please call in now, hit the passcode and then hit *9 to raise your hand, or if you're on the Zoom call, hit the reactions button at the bottom and then raise hand. That way it'll be ready to go when we get there, because my comments are very brief. Obviously, I just want to remind everybody who's watching, the election is coming up on October 15th. There's advanced voting on October 5th and 12th, and there's, of course, mail-in ballot voting as well. Next week, September 26th, we'll be having a discussion on the next report back on infill housing, and so just to give people a heads up on that. And I want to just remind everybody that there is on September 30th, the South Island powwow that's being organized by the Songhees and other nations. It's going to be a large event at Royal Athletic Park that's welcoming people from all over the region. I also understand there's going to be an earlier event of some sort by a reconciliation group here in Oak Bay. I believe it's at 10 o'clock. I don't have the details in front of me, but I'll share that at the next meeting so that I can share that information as well. But just so you can plan, if you're interested, to come out on September 30th in recognition of the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Those are all my comments. Moving on, we have a big agenda in front of us. We have public comment and question period. If anybody wishes to speak to address council, this is the time. I don't think we had anybody on the registration list to speak to council, but if you're here, please come up to the microphone. Right here, yes. So procedures bylaw, we have a total of 20 minutes for all speakers. Each speaker is given 3 minutes, so I'll keep track of the time. And if you could just start with your name, municipality of residence, and then you're welcome to address us, sir. Sorry, we'll just turn on your microphone here.
Tony Orton. I reside on Wilmot Place in Oak Bay.
Thank you.
I'll be as quick as I can. I do not believe, first of all, good evening, Mayor Murdoch,
Good evening.
Council. I do not believe that this council is aware of how many residents are frustrated, angry and upset at the pollution and noise constantly emanating from public works. Thus far, I have spoken to over 40, and that is scratching the surface. Residents of Baptist housing, many of whom are elderly, some with health issues, are muzzled from complaining due to an agreement with this council, which precludes them from complaining about noise.
We don't have any agreements to preclude people from complaining.
With Baptist housing, you do.
I don't think
It
we do,
wasn't
but
this
anyway.
specific council, but it was.
I'll let you
put
go.
in.
Sorry to interrupt. Continue, sir.
There can be no argument whatsoever that the dump is not being utilized as originally intended, and that it should not be where it is in the first place. It's also bursting at the seams and well over capacity and increasing at an alarming rate. With the expected increase in Oak Bay residents, as envisaged by the secondary suites as well as the infill housing, Oak Bay is heading for a major problem unless the many issues are dealt with. Oak Bay's priority plan looks great on paper, makes little effort to achieve and adhere to those plans. Tough anti-noise bylaws apply to residents but not to Oak Bay. Oak Bay, backed by this protection, does not care at all how much noise and pollution they make, as there's no will to do so. The single biggest problem, I believe, is lack of leadership, forward-thinking, planning, and action to address the entire facility. It is inevitable that the dump will become significantly busier, more hazardous, and the potential for a major problem is staring this municipality in the face. For the past 3 years, letters to yourself, this council, and letters and meetings with works management has achieved virtually nothing. It's obvious there is neither the will, the finances, or the tools to address these issues. Frustratingly, even commitments made in writing and verbally are never implemented. A few problem areas: backup beepers and hours. Residents had a few brief months of relief with the installation of white noise backup beepers. It didn't take long for this to change to new super loud beepers running at all hours of day and night. Commencing around July this year, vehicles operate with insane levels of noise on Saturdays, Saturday nights, Sundays, even holidays, starting as late as 7 p.m. until as late as 10 p.m. And despite repeated requests to cease, it's ignored. It's absolutely infuriating. Fencing. Oak Bay cut down all the trees protecting homes on the north side of the upper level and placed a low concrete fence in its place without replacing any trees. Pictures are available and show no concern for residents or the environment. Management agreed in writing in 2020 that a new sound dampening 10-foot concrete fence would be constructed on the east side of the dump to replace the sagging plywood.
Mr. I'm just going to ask to wrap it up. We've hit
Well,
time.
I'll
If
be
we can
as
just,
quick as I can. I'll be maybe 2 minutes. This was not done. Again, promises were made to do this in 21 and 22. Of course, nothing's done. Smashing glass. Receipt of glass should be stopped immediately for many reasons. It's excluded from on your website. The blue bin recycling program is fine, and the use of an open bag with decibel levels of 120 to 150, exposing your employees and residents to this cacophony, is just ridiculous. And to use an excuse that it's part of Recycle BC's program is a red herring and holds no water when reading the contract. Finally, hazardous waste. Batteries, including lithium and rechargeables, are haphazardly tossed in an open bin within meters of homes. Nearby is plastic, styrofoam, paint, thinners, and unchecked propane cylinders. Oak Bay does not have facilities to handle this. Example, lithium-ion rechargeable batteries that come in most portable electronics pose a very serious fire risk when disposed of improperly. When batteries end up in a trash or recycling facility, they get punctured or crushed, which can damage the separation between the cathode and diode, causing them to catch fire and explode. These fires have devastating consequences, such as the fire at San Mateo's materials recovery facility, which burned the entire plant.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up, sir.
Okay, I'm wrapping. Okay, in closing, these are just some of the issues. I would like Oak Bay to show some leadership and take ownership of this problem facility. There's solutions to many, if not all, the issues, but it requires a serious collective commitment to fix it. And I'd request this be put on the agenda for discussion in November, at which stage I'm sure many of the other residents I've spoken to will wish to attend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know that my understanding is that the glass piece is being addressed, but you have a long list there that are not, to the best of my knowledge, so thank you. Are there anybody else who wishes to address council? I'm just going to go back to my online. Yeah, we have Carrie Smart showing with a hand up. Feel free to address council. If you just again state your name and municipality of residence, and then you're welcome to. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Is this the appropriate time to speak if I want to speak directly to item 9.2?
Sorry, could you speak up a little bit? You're very quiet.
Is this the correct time to speak if I want to speak directly to item 9.2?
No, we'll have public input for each individual agenda items. This is just for general comments directed to council. Things that aren't
Okay,
on the
fine.
agenda.
Great, I'll wait till then. Thank you.
Go ahead. I have another hand up from Carl Quayle-Mar. You can just again state your name and municipality of residence, and you're free to address council.
I'm in your anteroom. May I come in and address you directly, please?
Sorry, you're a bit garbled as well. Could you just speak clearly into your microphone?
I'm in your anteroom. May I come into your space in person, please?
Yes, you may. Give us a second here. We'll make sure you're in. You can hang up and come on in, sir. We'll just have someone let you in.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, you're just going to have to turn the microphone on. There we go. And state your name, municipality of residence, and then feel free to address council.
My name is Carl Coria-Martin. I reside here in Oak Bay, specifically on Victoria Ave. And I just want to urge the council to increase the pedestrian and cyclist safety between South Oak Bay and the high school. My neighbor across the street was hit by a 95-year-old driver just a week and a half ago and dragged for 25 feet. I feel like this intersection is operating well beyond its designed safety capacity. And I think that this is a warning sign, a near miss. We're very lucky we didn't have a fatality. We're very lucky we don't have an elderly resident dealing with the trauma of committing vehicle manslaughter for one of our children. And I'd very much like to see an engineering control put in place to slow down traffic and increase the safety for pedestrians and cyclists on the crossing. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Correa Martin, and appreciate thank you. The thing I know that has gone into our engineering department for consideration at this point, so thank you for that. Are there any other members of the public who wish to address council on items that are of general interest to Oak Bay? Don't see any, so I believe that we can call that portion concluded. I'm just gonna adjust on my screen here. Perhaps you can just lower the one hand so it's. No, we're good. Go enjoy the evening. Thank you very much, everyone. Next, we're going to move on to section 8 for presentations. Tonight we have fire service review and master plan update. Mr. Mitchell, nice to see you in person. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, and I'm wondering where I'll see my slides so I know what I'm speaking to.
Give us a moment to bring them up on screen so that it comes through on the live stream as well as our people in the audience here can see it. Give us another minute. Perhaps you could just introduce yourself and just explain to the council your relationship to our fire department and what you've been working on, and then we'll do a little soft segue into the presentation itself.
For sure. Maybe I'll just get started. And first of all, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to meet with you in person. The meeting moved from Monday to Thursday to Wednesday to Tuesday, and I'm so glad it worked out. So that I could meet with you in person and talk about your fire department's master plan. We commenced the project late in 2021 with a thorough review of the physical area. We drove it extensively, looked at all of the issues, examined the distribution of properties by type and by construction. We also reviewed all relevant documentation, bylaws, including response data from 2016. If you go to slide number 2. Thank you. We also met with the majority of the members of the department, including discussions with the association. And the project, however, paused with the retirement of Chief Hughes and the recruitment of Chief MacDonald. We've also met with and reviewed the issues with the former and current CAO, Director of Human Resources. And so identifying the major issues facing all fire services in BC will seem quite formidable when we get through this list, but you are not alone. This actually applies to all fire services in the province. So among these, the mandatory training requirements for structural firefighting are being revised, and we think they will become more detailed and have additional levels of requirements. The Fire Safety Act is pending, which will affect how your department operates. The Emergency Program Act is being rewritten, as I know council is aware, reflecting the changes in responses we have seen in the past several years in the province. These changes are considerable and have become more complex. As well, these past several years have seen fire and other emergency services needing to address an increase in fires and flooding, and to deal with the heat dome last year, homelessness, and the opioid crisis. So I'll be outlining the issues for consideration to this point in the review, and our final report will be completed later in Q4. As the cover slide noted, for fire services, this is a time of considerable change. Next slide. So this is who we are. So for more than 22 years, our firm is honored. Starting in 2000. Many of these have been in the Capital Regional District, including a previous review of 911. We have also provided advice for the recently revised mutual aid model. This project for Oak Bay, a master fire plan, is similar to ones we have provided for a number of departments, as noted on the slide. Some of these are currently underway, and these include Port Moody and Prince George, and recently completed ones with Souk and North Saanich. Our area of practice is British Columbia for the most part, but also includes the north. We've worked with Whitehorse, most recently again with Yellowknife, along with fire services in Alberta, such as Calgary and Lethbridge, Winnipeg, and Toronto Fire Services. As for me, I started with the Vancouver Fire Department in April of 1966, so I've got old and experienced, hopefully. In 1998, I then spent 2 years with ECOM in a position now titled the Vice President of Operations. And in that role, hired the staff and transitioned in dispatch for Vancouver Police and the RCMP and 911 for 3 regional districts, and we did that in June of 1999. Since 2000, my colleagues and I have been providing fire services consulting. A member of our team is Wayne Humphrey, like me, a Vancouver Fire veteran, and he's a fire services training and incident management expert, as well as being very well versed in the deployment of fire scenes. As well, he specializes in the provision and use of fire apparatus. Jim Cook is also part of this project team, and he has been here for previous meetings, including recently with the CAO. Jim retired as fire chief in West Vancouver. Previously, he was with New Westminster as their deputy chief, and his specialties are budgets, policy, and the organizational model. And Ian MacDonald, a retired corporate services lawyer. And Ian deals with many regulatory issues and has provided advice in this region on a number of files, including the Regional Mutual Aid Agreement and Oak Bay's bylaw. Next slide. So the BC Fire Service context. Your fire department, like all others, is facing major service challenges. But these can also be viewed as opportunities. Talk about the mandatory training standards for structure firefighting in BC, and these are being amended, and we suspect when they are announced will now be fully aligned with WorkSafe BC. Also, the Fire Safety Act is pending and will consider a significant change to how local governments conduct fire safety inspections, switching to a risk-based model from the current model, and redefining the requirements for fire inspectors and fire investigators, and these will be substantial changes, and we should see them as well in 2023. The Emergency Program Act is being rewritten, and we suspect it will be presented in the legislature in 2023. It embraces the Sendai model and will fully recognize and harmonize with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We suspect that it may mandate formal community risk assessments, which we have seen elsewhere in Canada, and our firm recently conducted one for the city of Yellowknife. It will be an all-government approach to these issues. And finally, firefighter health and safety concerns continue to be with us. There are now 16 cancers which are presumed to be related to your occupation as a firefighter. PTSD is now recognized and accepted, and heart disease is now also considered a presumptive disease for firefighters in BC. Quite simply, firefighting is a very dangerous profession. Next slide. The report by the chief coroner into the 2021 heat dome identified a number of concerns that we had not seen before, frankly. Her report noted that 911 calls doubled during the peak, and BC Emergency Health Services had issues with the availability of ambulances, and we seem to see that continuing this year as well. Fire departments generally saw their resources stretched to the limit, and your department was impacted in a big way, as you will see in just a couple of slides. And for some periods of time in emergency services, there was simply no reserve capacity at all. Next slide, please. The new BC Fire Commissioner, Brian Godlinton, has provided his annual report for 2021, and it came out earlier this year, noting a doubling of fire deaths in 3 years and a 119% increase in the number in the past 2 years, and these are quoted directly from his report. The Fire Commissioner also reports that those aged 50 and greater have a higher rate of death by fire, and he expresses a concern given that this demographic is increasing. Next slide, please. So your fire department is responding to more incidents than previously. This graph is for all incidents except first medical response, which will be discussed in a moment. So these responses are for all fires, motor vehicle incidents, alarms ringing, hazardous materials calls, wires down, assists to the public, rescues, fire prevention, brush fires, and marine rescue, etc. They do a lot. And over the period, the total number of these is increasing, and we expect this will continue. Next slide, please. So the occurrence of structure fires in Oak Bay is reasonably stable over the period. Note, however, that an effective response for structure fires requires the assistance of Salish and/or Victoria, both of which departments are also getting busier. And the reason for this is that in the critical 8 to 10 first minutes of a fire, residential fires require a minimum of 16 firefighters. The staffing for a frame apartment building or a strip mall is a minimum of 27. And for a high-rise, the staffing level is a minimum of 42. The issue is that Oak Bay only has 5 firefighters on duty. The department cannot effectively manage a single-family residential fire without the attendance from one or both of the neighboring departments. Next slide, please. This graph shows the significant impact of the COVID-19 changes and the corresponding changes by BC Emergency Health Services between March and April of 2020. Monthly responses by your department went from 54 in March of 2020 to 16 1 month later. By mid-2021, they had recovered, and in 2022 are exceeding totals for the previous time period. What this points out is that some portion of responses are not in your direct control, but are instead related to other factors, including such things as policy changes. This is a pattern that we see with many fire departments throughout the province that we're working with. Next slide, please. Your department's response profile also varies significantly by hour of day. You might expect this would be the case, but the differential is quite significant. The peak hours late in the afternoon are 4 times the rate of response 12 hours earlier. And this underlines the continuing complexity of managing and maintaining a response capability over any day with essentially a flat staffing model. Next slide, please. Now, I spoke earlier about surge capacity, which is a concern for all fire departments, as your department's staffing levels are unchanged while call volumes have been rising significantly. Staffing levels for the fire department in Oak Bay have in fact been reduced over many years. They were once higher than they are at present. Now, by way of example, consider the month of June in 2020 and 2021. In June 2020, on a number of days, there were no incidents at all. And there were just 3 days in that month that had a maximum of 4 calls for your department. By contrast, in June 2021, there were responses every day, including days with 5 and 6 incidents, and on one day, June the 28th, with 16 incidents in just 1 day. And we see this pattern repeated in many other parts of the province. It's a significant hit on surge capacity. Next slide, please. Now, responses by year and by month, as shown here, illustrate, again, the complexity of managing the department's response capability. Within any given year, the range of responses is significant. In some years, January is the busiest month, 2017, 2018, and 2020. But in other years, it is October, or May and June, or August. Now, as noted previously, the number of responses for 2022 is increasing, with April and May noticeably higher than the previous 2 years. In 2020 and 21, the first 5 months of the year averaged 386 incidents. This year, the same period has increased to 499, which is a 30% increase in just 2 years. Next slide, please. So we'll talk about the fire hall and the training site, and I think council is quite aware of these issues. The fire hall has been reviewed by a third party in 2016 in a facilities review and will require replacement to be compliant for personnel as well as apparatus. Modern fire apparatus simply will not fit into the current structure. Office space is severely limited and there is minimal washroom, storage, and training space. Building code and other requirements will require a post-disaster structure, which may then include an emergency operations center for Oak Bay. Speaking about training, compliance with the Office of the Fire Commissioner's training requirements is mandatory and likely to increase. The current training facilities are very limited and a range of other options must be considered. The training tower that was there previously was condemned and not replaced. The adjacent parking lot provides very little opportunity for training. The confined space vault utilized to maintain staff certification levels is no longer usable due to permanently low oxygen levels. Public use of the parking lot has increased over the years, which creates significant safety concerns if you were drilling in that area. The scout hall, historically utilized by suppression personnel to maintain minimum training requirements, was deemed inaccessible some time ago due to the possibility of damage. And training for a full-service fire department like Oak Bay is the most complex of the 3 levels of service with the highest level of requirements for training. So a review of 2 fire halls with training sites we visited in June follows with a bit of a description, and this shows some of the props and the need to provide secure access to the site to protect the assets as well as to protect the public. Next slide, please. So this is Delta's Fire Hall number 4. This is adjacent to the airport. And Delta is a full-service fire department just like Oak Bay. The plan view in the upper right shows the layout on the property. The clip on the lower left shows the secured training area, and this is a staffed fire hall plus a training site. It's about 13,000 square meters, and they do live fire training there, which is a requirement for the department, as it is for yours. They use compressed gases rather than wood to minimize smoke and the impact on the environment. They teach auto extrication, which your folks do. They have indoor classrooms, and when we met with them, we asked them, what was your advice to someone else who's going to build a training site? And they said, think ahead and plan carefully. Ensure sufficient administrative and technical support. They also learned lessons about water flow management, which they didn't include when they built the facility, and we take that away as advice for everybody else we work with. The message was, if you're going to do this and if you're going to consider post-disaster buildings, make sure that you look at space planning and consider all of the factors. Next slide, please. This is a similar arrangement. This is Port Coquitlam's Hall number 1, also a full-service fire department, just like Oak Bay. The plan view of the fire hall and training site is shown in the upper right, and in the lower left, again, you can see the training site and other props, again, in a secured location. This is a staffed hall with the training site adjacent, about 13,000 square meters in all. Again, for their live fire training, they use compressed gas. They teach auto extrication. They have classrooms and all of the things they need to do appropriate training. The stacked containers that you see are the so-called sea cans, and currently your firefighters for their live fire training have to go to Otter Point, which is some distance away and is a challenge to schedule. Again, when we talked to the chief and the training officer in Port Coquitlam, they said, again, plan ahead, think what you're doing, make sure that the building you build will meet your requirements. Next slide, please. So this is the organizational model, and the organizational model for your department had remained unchanged for a great many years. Earlier this year, Chief MacDonald was hired and the management model tweaked to move Assistant Chief Stewart to days. This was recommended as the leadership team has a lot of work ahead of them, including not just running the department, but replacement of the fire hall, commissioning of new apparatus required by the fire underwriters. This is not a status quo department. They will also be assessing the risk and coping with the pending changes in the minimum requirements for structure firefighting, the change in fire inspections and fire investigations, and they will also need to factor in the Emergency Program Act and a rising call volume. Next slide, please. So in terms of the next steps, the issue of a staffing level adjustment to move beyond a single truck response will be addressed in the final report in Q4. Staffing level need to address and respond to the staffing challenges and overtime and burnout of staff due to the many issues. These include changes to the WorkSafe rapid intervention team requirements, cancer and heart presumptions, mental health injuries, PTSD claims, maternity and paternity leave, and additions or changes to statutory holidays. There is a need to optimize the management model to address all of the major projects, as well as to manage risk and to comply with the mandatory regulatory issues. Replacement of the fire hall will require a huge commitment, as will the development of a training site and training options for your firefighters. Ongoing, the leadership team will need to continue to manage intra-regional issues, including cross-border incident response and emergency management. Next slide, please. So final comment is that your chief officers and firefighters at all levels expressed to us their total understanding of and deep personal commitment to fire safety in Oak Bay. They're very switched on. They really want to do the right thing, and we hope that our report will provide a framework for how that can be achieved. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mitchell. Obviously, this is not for decisions tonight. We're just getting an update to get us, this council and the public, a chance to get a sense of where we're at and what's to come. Obviously, a lot to come. So I'll take a few questions here, but we also have to move on to the rest of the meeting. Go ahead, Councillor Green, and then Braithwaite.
Thank you very much. And through you to Mr. Mitchell, thank you very much for such a detailed plan. And just a quick question. The current site of our fire services and police services, is it sufficiently big enough, do you think, to expand and build, for instance, a new training center, new building? I was just in comparison to the put you on the spot either, but just wondered if that is still a suitable site to expand. Thank you.
Councillor's question is a very good one, and we've discussed this with the city, the CAO, and with the department, obviously. And what we think needs to be done is a proper space planning exercise to look and see what is the need. We can build out, but we can also build up. And in many other cities in BC, look to put additional facilities on top to help pay for it and so on. So I think the councillor's question is a good one. What will be recommending is engagement with the space planning group, and there are companies that do this with municipal fire departments and police departments. It may be the right site. There is some issues with the creek and so on, which will be daylighted. So in terms of a location, it is generally a very good location. The fire underwriters look at travel distances, and that area near the center of the response area is good, but it's never to 6 decimal places. It can only be on that corner. In fact, it can be within a reasonable distance of there, and a space planning exercise would be quite appropriate.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Braithwaite, then Zulka, then Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. And through you, thanks, Mr. Mitchell. That was wonderful. A couple of points that you talked about intrigued me, and I just wondered if you could touch on them briefly. And that was the increase in calls. You said that from 2019 to 2021 that there was a 107% increase, and I'm wondering what that was based on. Was that from people who have because our population is getting older, and so we're getting more calls from people in that age group, or?
That percentage, I think referred to the fire commissioner's report. And this is a new fire commissioner as of 2 years ago, and he is really working very hard to develop a proper database, and I give him a great deal of credit. Brian Godleton is his name, was once with Vancouver Fire as well. Very data-driven, and one of the issues that we see in Canada is we don't have a consolidated set of fire response or fire criticality data. In the US they do. They have a system called NFIRS, and all states report their data into one standard model. In Canada we don't, but there is a movement, strong movement being led again by BC's Fire Commissioner to standardize that, and so I think we look forward to getting better data to answer your question from all fire departments.
Go ahead.
Just to follow up on that, because I think also you talked about the responses by year and month within Oak Bay as well, and how this year it's 499, and on an average it was about 370 or something like that. And so that's a large increase as well.
It is, and so we always wish we had a slide rule that could tell us precisely the reasons for everything to occur, but we can think that there's multiple things that happen. Unfortunately, the population is graying, and so there is a bigger demand. The scope of practice is being changed for fire first responders. They will be allowed to and encouraged to take a broader level of training to provide better level of service to the public when they need them. We seem to be getting warmer, and so we tend to get more fires and other issues as a result. Certainly in many parts of BC, we see a lot of forest vegetation dying out, drying out, and a lot more issues there. So in any given year, there's not a straight line projection that says we know we can go from here to there, but we can see in the quantum of the responses, it is increasing for multiple reasons. Someone else, and I don't mean to be cheeky about this, in fact, it was Len Garris, the former fire chief in Surrey, he said, there's 3 things that cause fire department responses: men, women, and children. If you add more men, women, and children, you get more calls, and that may be reasonably true.
Thank you. I go ahead to Councillor Zelka and then Patterson.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I sent a few questions in ahead of time. Hopefully you received them so that none of these are surprised. With respect to the 107% increase BC-wide, I wanted to ask, does that include Indigenous or First Nations reserve, folks living on First Nations reserve?
We think that's a goal, Councillor, and it's a very good question as well. And I've talked about it with the chief and the assistant chief. It's one of the data elements that Brian Godlinton is trying to capture in the database. It's a work in progress, but it's much better than it once was. Being different levels of government, sometimes there's an issue in collecting the data, but I think the fire commissioner would also has remarked in past that one of the highest incidents of fire fatalities is in fact in First Nations, and I think we in the fire service see this as a thing we need to address and deal with. And incidentally, I'm going tomorrow to deal with the Lytton Fire Department, which provides the majority of their responses to First Nations territories. And because they are different levels of government, there are still issues around ensuring clarity around the service agreements and what's agreed. So it's a complex issue, and there's not a perfect answer yet, but it's something we can refer to the fire commissioner. And again, Commissioner Godlinton is very engaged about this issue.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you so much, Chair. Yeah, I very much appreciate that. And if there's anything that we can do to help in terms of our fire services and mutual aid with respect to the local First Nations, since I have heard the same rumor that, and looking forward to the real hard numbers, that the fatalities for fire are much higher amongst First Nations. So if there's anything we can do to help with that, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing about that. The next question had to do with, what do you think was part of the alarming increase in the last year or two, BC-wide?
Well, certainly the COVID-19 caused a dip when a series of protocol changes were enacted and it stopped fire department responses. Then they ramped up and increased, and so there was a lot more first medical response by fire departments. The heat dome last year resulted in a great number of responses. My department, with I think 39 staffed apparatus these days, last year ran out of equipment. They ran out of equipment. Working with other departments, they went to calls. They were sending people to hospital in taxi cabs. And so there's a complex answer to that question. It's not all one thing, Councillor. It's not all one thing.
Go ahead.
Very much appreciate that. So it sounds like equipment was being sent off in other directions for other issues, and potentially the fire-related issues couldn't be addressed, potentially. Final question, I guess, has to do with we have upcoming a secondary suites process that relies on an alternate approval process of the BC Building Code, which will change the well, the building code has a level of standard. The alternate is technically a slightly lower level with respect to the building code to make it easier to put these suites in. What impact will this have on fire safety in Oak Bay? And I've been told that this question is in order.
It's an open question at the moment. It's something we're working with the department, and we'll be talking with the building and the permitting authority here. What we know generally is that where these facilities are put in, they will generate more calls because there's more residences, but specifically for Oak Bay. I can't tell you what the impact would be at this point in time.
And does anybody of this other staff want to answer the question, or we move on? Go ahead, Mr. Bull. And for those listening at home, as our Director of Community Building and Planning, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, maybe one thing to note out, because secondary suites is a particular situation where we're dealing with also existing suites throughout our community, and our hope is that if provided that these changes get adopted, that existing suites can be improved and be brought up to standards to whatever the building code might prescribe for existing or for new ones. So in that sense, in very general terms, at least from a planning perspective, I'm not a firefighter, but we're moving towards a place where more of these units will be compliant with whatever the standards are for the particular scenario, which is generally a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson, then Appleton.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the report, Mr. Mitchell. Very interesting statistics in it. One of the ones I was wondering about is, again, going back to the fire-related deaths and the increase. There have been a number of disasters over the last couple of years. The statistics, do they capture all incidents, or is there a separate capture of information relative to the disaster areas like fire zones where, you know, we've had major burning buildings of the whole town? So is it related to that too?
Councillor's question is a very good one. So there's multiple parts to that. And so the statistics about fire occurrence, we'll forward to you, forwarded to the department in anticipation of the councillor's question, the fire commissioner's report and his 2 quarterly reports since then. And I think you will find them interesting, and they break down what fires are caused by smoking materials, what are caused by cooking, what age group, what type of buildings are they in, and so on. And so the ability to mine this data and give us better answers to provide service is a bit of a work in progress, but it's much improved over what it once was.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you. I noted here in Oak Bay statistics, and I think we understand that a lot of the fire department's response is for medical emergencies, and I understand there has been more pressure on fire emergency services because of reduced capacity within other emergency services. Is that something that provincially and perhaps even nationally fire departments will be looking at, the difference between how we respond to medical emergencies versus the need for actual firefighting capacity?
Very good question again. And we see more departments now implementing a second type of apparatus. And so I think Salish has recently implemented one. Vancouver did this some years ago, Port Coquitlam in many places. And so they will have a smaller unit. Maybe if you think about a Ford F-250 or a 350, 2 or 3 person unit, they call it a medic unit. Rather than taking the large fire truck there, they will take a smaller, more compact unit. It's quicker. Response is better, it's less expensive to operate, and is really focused on providing that medical care as opposed to providing fire response. I think you will see more of that in this region, and it's become well accepted as a good model to provide a response that does not require a 40-foot long fire truck, but if that's all we've got, that's what we take. So I think there's been a lot of leadership shown on this issue, and I know your chief officers are very aware of this as an option, and I think you might expect to see this be some of the recommendations we'll discuss in the report in Q4. There are some better ways to do this, Councillor, to be quick.
Great. Anything else, Councillor Patterson?
One last question that I have. The presentation included the overviews for Delta and Port Coquitlam. Those, both of those areas have much larger populations than we have here in Oak Bay. And I realize that firefighting is firefighting, and it's not necessarily related to the size of the population as the disaster that is occurring. But is there a scalability for the training equipment that is required for perhaps a smaller zone versus someplace like Delta, which is a population of 100,000?
Yeah, good question. And really the training requirements are driven by the level of service, and so your department by council policy is a full-service department. For that, there's a very specified list of what are called job performance requirements, JPRs, and you must meet them. How you meet them is up to you. Where you meet them is up to you. At the moment, for example, when your firefighters get live fire training, they have to go to Otter Point, which means they're way out of the jurisdiction and not available. One advantage for providing a training site in the jurisdiction is your on-duty crew can train, as opposed to having to be off-duty and to be sent someplace else. You're right, it's scalable, and oftentimes within a region, more than one fire department will share a training site. You probably know Salish is building a new one as part of their new fire hall on Royal Oak, and so there's always the opportunities for joint training. In the Lower Mainland, a big city like Burnaby doesn't have a training facility. They go to Maple Ridge to the Justice Institute. So when I spoke earlier, that I said there would be a range of options to be considered. There's no one size fits all. It's not like tube socks. We would configure this to meet the requirements within the region. Our goal here is to manage risk for Oak Bay and manage risk for your firefighters so they're trained appropriately to deal with bad things. How we do that, there's always a number of ways to do it. And again, Chief McDonald and his team will explore that within the region, and we will with them.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton, and maybe, I think you're the last speaker, so if there's, you might want to make the motion to receive as well, and we can, then I'll have other comments. Go ahead.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you for the presentation. I've been interested in our discussions with respect to fire response. One thing that comes up repeatedly is the requirements of the fire underwriters group in terms of what is required in terms of response time, in terms of apparatus and equipment for a small department like ours in a small community like ours. Significant investments in apparatus is a major expenditure, and so I've asked repeatedly questions about obviously the requirements of what type of apparatus is necessary and what type of equipment's on those apparatuses is limiting for us because we only have a certain number of apparatus and it has to serve multiple functions. So I'm just kind of curious as to whether you could comment sort of the effect of we have almost a physical limitation because of the nature of our fire hall. So we talk a lot about the size of our apparatus because certain apparatus just won't fit in it. So I'm kind of curious as we have the discussion about what would be a suitable replacement facility. I think everybody understands that a replacement facility is necessary, but how do we do that sort of that calculus between the necessary facility as well as the necessary apparatus that need to fit inside it? And I appreciate your comments about sort of smaller scale apparatus that might be able to do some response without having to be the full engine, as it were. So is there any way that we can do that calculus back and forth between the size of the structure to house the apparatus themselves, and what they need to do?
It's a complex issue, and the fire underwriters have an immensely complex calculus about how they determine your rating. And Oak Bay has a very good rating, both for dwelling protection and for the commercial and multi-family one. It could be improved, and any improvement is reflected in reduced insurance costs for people that own buildings, and that's part of the calculus. The underwriters understand that not every city can have everything, and so they give a great deal of credit for mutual aid and automatic mutual aid, and so you have very good automatic mutual aid with Salish, for which you get credit from the underwriters. We will be talking further with the chief, but Chief McDonald is very aware of this as an issue, and a robust and effective and efficient mutual aid agreement within this capital region would go a long way to providing the best possible rating from the fire underwriters. But a city the size of Oak Bay all on its own couldn't do it, but the underwriters are prescient enough to understand that if you have mutual aid agreements and automatic mutual aid agreements, you get a great deal of credit for those. And when those departments do have those agreements, the other things have to be done as well. Pre-plans, which are required for your building. You wouldn't want to go into a 3 or 4 story building that's on fire without a pre-plan. Well, your responding partners from other cities, they need to have those as well, and you need to have theirs for when you go there. So there's a lot of stuff kind of a little bit below the waves here that has to be done to make this work efficiently, but it's very much on the work plan for the department going forward and will be reflected in the report.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I would move that the fire service review and master plan update presentation be received.
Seconded, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you. Appreciate the updates. Just wanted to know when a full picture sort of plan will be coming forward. That gives us
A little bit later
aspects.
a little bit later in fourth quarter, but certainly before the end of the year and obviously in time for budget
In time
planning
for
and so
budget.
on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And certainly look forward to seeing that come forward. I know there's a lot of work to do. And thank you very much for this update. I'm going to call the question on the motion to receive. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you for that. We are now moving on to the Capital Regional District Regional Parks Loan Authorization Borrowing Bylaw number 4506. Mr. Coates, I understand you are introducing this, and we also have Mr. Chan from the CRD as well to answer any questions. I see you online. Welcome, Mr. Chan. Nice to see you. Welcome, Mr. Coates.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Just a brief staff report before you to highlight the ask from the CRD, which is a consideration of consent to the adoption of Regional Parks Loan Authorization Borrowing Bylaw number 4506. And essentially what that provides for is borrowing of up to $25 million over the next 5 years for future parkland acquisition. Just the quick details on the service. The Regional Park Service is one that all 13 local governments and the 3 electoral areas participate in. The CRD is seeking your consent. Consent is achieved when 2/3 of the participants provide that, and that would enable the borrowing to take place. So essentially, for your consideration, and you'll note the CRD staff report and a copy of the bylaw are attached. And in that staff report, CRD staff note that the average cost to the average household in the region is about $3 per year. And of course, that changes depending on particular assessments. And there isn't sort of detailed information available at this point around what that means specifically for Oak Bay. The tax for this is included in the regional district requisition and shows up on individual property tax notices. Any questions? Happy to answer. And as you indicated, Mayor Murdoch, that Mr. Chan from the CRD is available for more detailed questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coates. Mr. Chan, you've been waiting patiently. Is there anything you wish to add to Mr. Coates' report before I go to questions?
I just want to thank Mr. Coates for a great introduction. I don't think there is any additional information I can add at this time, but certainly happy to answer any questions, provide any additional color that might be needed by council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, I have Councillor Green, Braithwaite, Patterson.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Coates. Through you, Mayor. I'm happy to make a motion at this time and for discussion. The reason being, I think all of us agree that regional parks are a huge asset.
Why don't you make a motion before you start motivating?
Oh, sorry.
Move the recommendation?
I will move the recommendation. Thank you.
Sure. Well, why don't we do, but it's a good point. We can move receipt first just to get that procedural piece out of the way.
I'll move receipt.
Move that seconded. I'm going to call the question on the receipt. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
And I'll move the motion, please, the recommendation.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I think I'm probably speaking to the converted, but I know how valuable the parks are in the region, CRD parks. I also know that we have been a partner in those parks for some time, and in fact we have one within our boundary at the top of Gonzales Hill. And I think during the time of COVID, parks became even more valuable, an even greater asset for people because it allowed them to get outside and that kind of thing. So I think the motivation is here in Oak Bay to value parks. So that's why I'm motivating the motion. Thanks.
Thank you.
That was a little cumbersome. I'm sorry.
No, cumbersome's always fine. Councillor Braithwaite, then Patterson.
Thanks so much. I have two questions. I think one is for our staff and one is for Mr. Chan. To our staff, when we sign on to something like this, does it affect our borrowing capabilities whatsoever with the MFABC?
Mr. Coates?
I'll take a stab at that, and I know Mr. Payne is, last time I checked, was here, but my understanding is that no, this is not affecting the municipality's borrowing authority at all.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And then my other question, and I believe this would be to Mr. Chan, is that I'm not sure with the rise in interest rates if that affects the interest rate that we're getting from the MFABC, because I noticed that in the report that this interest rate was from July and things have happened with interest rates. Is that an interest rate that was tied in at that time and will continue for the length of that borrowing?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Mr. Chan?
Sure, through the chair, maybe just really quickly, Mr. Coates was correct on the last question. The impact of borrowing would not be affected by this. In the province of BC, the MFA and through the Local Government Act channel all borrowings through regional districts in a joint mechanism called joint and several liability. So as a result of that, we pool all of our resources together and then borrow against that collateral, so to speak. So this individual borrowing wouldn't affect Oak Bay's ability to further leverage at a future time. I wouldn't worry about that. The second part about interest rates, definitely interest rates have been changing over the last little while. The report that we brought forward used the MFA indicative rate. So monthly MFA publishes various market changes and market conditions. They update those rates on a regular basis. That rate is what it was at that time. The rate at which would be used at the borrowing would happen at the time of borrowing. So that was just an indicator of what that rate would be at that time. I'm trying to do two things at once and look up what the MFA indicative rate is now, which I will do that maybe after I stop talking. But typically, when a purchase comes forward, at that time of issuing that security issuing bylaw, we would execute the rate at that. I will say that the MFA has done a great job in terms of leveraging, again, that joint and several liability to be able to access rates well below other markets and other conditions that other folks borrow at.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I think this question is probably for Mr. Chan. Mr. Coates did say that the assessment on average would be about $3 per household. How will the assessment be established annually, though? Is that on population, or how is the assessment going to be distributed throughout the region?
Mr. Chan?
Absolutely. So assessments are based on property values. Those are issued by the BC Assessment Authority. So annually, if you're a homeowner, you receive a very nice sheet of paper from BC Assessments, which outlines by property ID elements of assets. So it could be a land value, you could have a building value, and so on. And that would give you your assessed value or the expected value of that property and all the dwellings that were on that property. As that property changes in assessment value annually, which is evaluated by a BC assessment, the amount of your value also changes. So when we try to give an estimation of the impact on an average assessment, if the average home value, actually in 2023, the average home value in the single family home in the Capital Regional District reached $1.4 million. So on an average $1.4 million house, the implication or the borrowing of $25 million would be roughly $3 per average assessed household. So that's kind of how that works. And what I would say is, as your assessment changes, that value wouldn't change unless your assessment changed at a disproportionate rate than other assessments. So if everyone's assessment increases on average 30%, which is what it did last year, the impact that you would pay as an average household at $3 wouldn't change. But if your house in particular increased at a much higher rate than the average, then your rate would increase. It might go from $3 to $3.25 or $3.50. I hope that helps, but that's kind of how assessments work and what it means by average residential assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Chan. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, with the land acquisition strategy and the planned borrowing, have land parcels been identified or qualified for the parks areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question through you, Mayor. So the Capital Regional District has a land acquisition strategy, and in that strategy, it includes criteria and classifications, and basically, it's a decision-making model that says, the philosophy of land acquisition is larger swaths of land are more valuable than smaller swaths. Those with ecological value, contiguous parcels are much more valuable from that perspective. But it really lays out a decision-making process to say these are priority A type lands, priority B type lands, and then a bunch of lands that we wouldn't necessarily consider unless there was some intervention by the board or by a particular municipality that brought that to the board. That did occur a number of times since I've been finance officer at the CRD. The board evaluates that, staff bring a report to say, here's the criteria, here's the criteria and strategy of land acquisition that the board approved. Based on that criteria, this particular piece of property either falls in category A, category B, or would not qualify. And then if there was a strong push for for that particular property, then the board would evaluate it at that time. So hopefully that answers, but certainly happy to clarify if you need any additional feedback or follow up on that.
Thank you, Mr. Janik. Go ahead, Councilor Patterson.
Thank you, that's fine.
Thank you, Councilor Zelka.
Very quick question and comment. I'm very pleased to see the MFA as the authority being considered for the funding. But I wanted to ask, why is the Inspector of Municipalities? Why do we require their approval? Thank you very much. That would be my only question.
Mr. Chan.
Thank you through the mayor. So the Inspector of Municipalities approves all bylaws for form, for correctness, for alignment to legislation. So as we build these bylaws, it goes through a number of iterative review process, and the Inspector of Municipalities is sort of the final provincial legislative review to ensure that all of the elements are met within the requirements. So that's why the inspector is really the ultimate authority to say, yes, this bylaw complies. Yes, we've received consent from 2/3 of the participants, and that's why that's in there. And then the last thing I'll just add is I was able to look up the MFA rate. The current MFA rate as of September for the same time is 4.34. So you can see not a big change. And like I said, I think the MFA has done a great job in leveraging that joint and several liability to keep rates low. Despite the huge changes in the overnight lending rate from the Bank of Canada, even since July.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Councilor Zelka. Another question? You're good. We have a motion on the floor. I think what's maybe not obvious at the beginning of this whole piece is that this is really asking for the right to borrow, largely because the board foresaw that land values are going up considerably in cost, and there might be some opportunities in the shorter term to acquire some land that the board wanted to have the ability to basically have pre-authorization to borrow should those opportunities arise ahead of the money being put aside, because that we've drawn down that to acquire lands quite a lot. So that's the impetus for this, and I think that the board had I believe it was unanimous support to move it forward for consideration for approval at this table, and I'm certainly very supportive of this going forward. Don't see other discussion on the motion. The motion is live. I will call it. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposes. That passes unanimously, Mr. Chan. You can we'll make a formal response to that, but one off your list there. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, and I guess I will see you tomorrow. Take care. Up next, we have item number 9.2, options analysis. This is subject to public input, so if members of the public wish to address us, you're more than welcome to do so. If you're on the Zoom app, you can raise your hand at this time, or if you're calling into the 1-855 number, you can hit *9 to raise your hand. We are not going to the public at the beginning. What we will do here is we're going to have a brief presentation. We'll have questions from council, but before we get to any motions, we will be going to any speakers who wish to address us. We have had a large amount of correspondence come in, so we have that, and the council if you're one of the writers and wish to highlight something, you're welcome to do so, but we'd ask you not to reread pieces of literature that you've already written to us. Before we get to the public, though, let's here go to, Mr. Weber? No. Rennick. Oh, I should look down, Mr. Rennick. I was just sort of in my own little mind here, thinking of land use things. Welcome, Mr. Rennick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry
I will
about that.
try not to take that personally.
It's been a while since we've had you.
It's been a while. Good evening, Your Worship. Good evening, Council. Myself and Director Haran are here to speak with respect to active transportation. This is in reference to Council Strategic Initiative 2022-G. Can I get the next slide, please? So just as a little bit of background for why we're here, in strategic priorities in November of 2021, one of the strategic priorities was establish expanded active transportation program. And just so that I have the wording 100% accurate, Council is not exactly seeking to increase the active transportation program funding from the status quo. Rather, they were looking for options for what a program might look like that might result in an increase in funding, but did not actually approve the increase in funding at that time. Can I get the next slide, please? So just to kind of explain what exactly is meant by active transportation, we are relying on the British Columbia Active Transportation Design Guide, and I'm not going to read the full definition that I've copied up there, but essentially active transportation is any sort of human-powered transportation. So that could be walking on a sidewalk, rolling in a wheelchair, could also be cycling or skateboarding. I also particularly enjoy the part about water-based active modes or horseback riding, but both of those are out of the scope of this presentation. Next slide, please. So just kind of a little bit more background on what are the active transportation goals that Oak Bay has over the past 10 years or so. In 2011, there was the Oak Bay Active Transportation Strategy, which had a number of improvements that were recommended to the pedestrian and cyclist networks. Then, as we kind of moved on through 2011, Oak Bay was also participating in CRD's Regional Pedestrian and Cycling Master Plan. In 2012, Council approved a Complete Streets policy, and in 2014, with the official community plan, the active transportation strategy was more or less incorporated into the OCP. One of the transportation objectives was essentially implement the active transportation strategy and implement the things that were recommended by it. Alongside with developing a sidewalk upgrading plan and promoting cycling and pedestrian travel as alternatives. And most recently, last year, Oak Bay initiated a pedestrian and sidewalk master plan, which the development is still underway. Also have a slide here showing over this council's term kind of how the budget for transportation, so this is not just active transportation, but also includes the Transportation Safety Improvements Program, how that's grown. So it's a little bit difficult to track exactly because in 2019, some of the programs had different names. As you can see in 2019, it was, we had traffic calming was a small pot and complete streets and sidewalk drops and sidewalks, but all of that added up to about $300,000. The next year, we had kind of combined and renamed traffic calming complete streets into transportation safety improvements. We were up to $400K. And 2021 and 2022, we were at approximately $700,000 between the two programs. So these two figures essentially show, figure one is the actual spending on the two transportation programs and how it is proposed to increase per year based on the financial plan. And then how that would look if we were to have a program that increased spending to $1 million per year in active transportation. So as you can see, it would be a significant difference from the funding that was currently in the 2022 to 2026 financial plan. Also just want to touch on government grant opportunities because part of the strategic priority was essentially to look into what grants are available. There's two major streams that we've identified. One of them is through the province. It's called the BC Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant. It used to be known as the Bike BC Grant. That essentially cost shares for 60% of eligible project costs up to a total project cost of $500,000. But the kind of caveat for accessing those grants is that the projects have to be shovel ready and they have to be identified in an active transportation plan or an official community plan. So it does require a little bit of investment on the part of the district to create those shovel ready projects in order to be able to apply for the grants. The other stream is the Canada Active Transportation Fund. This is a new program that was announced in the federal budget for 2022. It cost shares for 60%, but up to a much larger $50 million threshold. But I do point out that that's merit-based funding, and there's $400 million per year for 5 years, which sounds like a lot, but that is for the entire country. But that is a program that's out there. So we now want to kind of move into talking about essentially the two main components of active transportation in Oak Bay, which is cycling and then the sidewalk and trails network. So we will start with cycling. This figure from the official community plan was essentially the active transportation network that had been recommended by the 2011 active transportation strategy. There were guidelines in that strategy for implementing the plan, but there were no estimated costs, there was no timeline, there was no endorsement of which projects should be done in which order. And we also raised the point that this report was done over 10 years ago, and so it's possible that it no longer meets the community's needs or expectations as far as what kinds of routes or where we would do them. This figure shows the existing cycling network, and this comes from the most recent edition of CRD's regional cycling map. And it's a little bit hard to see, at least on the screen here, but most of the cycling network is orange, which CRD identifies as shared streets. And their Legends explanation of shared streets is that they may include traffic calming, signs, lower vehicle volume, or municipal designation. So that doesn't necessarily mean that there will be any paint markings at all. You could basically say this route is a bike lane, and that would be enough for it to qualify as a shared street per CRD. So the only thing that's actually blue in Oak Bay is Cadbro Bay Road and North Fowl Bay into Henderson. So just a couple of photos of some of the highlights of the existing cycling network. So these were the two blue roads that I was referencing. On the left, there's the Henderson Road shoulder bikeway. This is only active between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Monday to Friday. And on the right-hand side is the Cadbro Bay Road bike lanes, which were completed not that long ago in 2018. Went from Fowl Bay Road to Bowker Avenue, and that was partially grant funded. This is an example of a couple of what we would more refer to as shared streets. So Beach Drive, there is signage on it identifying it as a scenic bike route, and that diamond sign that's on the right-hand side of the photo is indicating that cyclists and drivers should share the lane. It's very popular with cyclists, but there's not a lot of separation and there are high vehicle speeds. Monterey Avenue is another example of a shared street. There are some pavement markings, there's signage alerting drivers that there are cyclists that will be using it, but there's not really any other accommodation made in the design of Monterey Avenue. We just wanted to kind of lay out some cycling project costs. So this document that we're referencing here was put together by Clean Air Partnership. It was a 2019 study where they looked at 29 different cycling infrastructure projects in 15 different Canadian cities, and it just kind of helps give municipalities an idea of different treatments and how much it costs to implement them. So for example, bike lane projects could run the gamut from what Victoria did on Johnson Street, which was essentially paint this particular project. That was $50 a meter, comparing to one that the city of Hamilton did where they separated their bike lanes with planters, and that was about 3 times the cost of the Johnson Street project. Or on the very high end is what Vancouver did on Dunsmuir Street. That's actual concrete separation and planters, but as you can see, the cost on that is almost 10 times what Hamilton spent. So really, it does run a wide gamut. I will point out, however, as a former Vancouver resident, that Dunsmuir is a very high traffic street, and I don't think that there's any street in Oak Bay that needs that level of separation between drivers and cyclists, but just wanted to kind of show the range. Aside from linear infrastructure, there's also intersection treatments that were covered by this report. And so the one that I'm showing on the left, those are cyclist detection loops that were installed in Edmonton for $100,000. And those are basically so that a cyclist, when they roll up to the traffic light detects that they're there without them needing to dismount their bike and hit the pedestrian button. City of Victoria recently installed one at Fort Street and Wharf, but that was after this report was published. So the cost for the one in Edmonton was $100,000. The one in the middle is a traffic calming island in City of Calgary. These are frequently used because they require drivers to slow down in order to be able to get around the island, which is great for cyclists. So that one was $100,000, and then the one on the right is a bike through median in the city of Quebec for $160,000. And that's also a style of intersection treatment that City of Victoria has recently been using on their bike routes. If I can get the next slide, please. So then moving on to pedestrian infrastructure. So this is just some examples of sidewalk projects, and for these photos I went with all Oak Bay because these are actually based on our own experience in past years. So new concrete sidewalk is about $400 a meter. Curb extensions like the one that's shown there at the intersection of Windsor Road and Monterey, depending on the location, that can be in the $20,000 to $40,000 range. Median islands, I believe that one's on Hampshire where Bowker Creek Pathway crosses it. It's about $10,000 to $20,000. And the last photo is a rapid rectangular flashing beacon crosswalk control. And again, depending on location, those are in the $10,000 to $20,000 range. So there's some guidance in the BC Active Transportation Design Guidelines on what exactly kind of infrastructure do you need to install. And it's dependent on motor vehicle speeds and motor vehicle volumes. The idea being that people would be a lot more comfortable sharing a road with cars doing 30K than they would be sharing the Pat Bay Highway. So all roads in Oak Bay are 50 kilometers per hour or lower, and all of our volumes are quite low. So everything in Oak Bay falls into either bicycle lane or buffered bicycle lane, or the slightly darker section which says depends on context, and the darkest section is neighborhood bikeway. So essentially painted bicycle lanes and neighborhood bikeways would cover most of the streets in Oak Bay, with the exception of maybe Foul Bay Road is a little bit outside of that 4,000 motor vehicles per day volume for really cyclist comfort in a painted bike lane. As for the sidewalks, separated sidewalk and enhanced separated sidewalk would be preferable. So separated sidewalk is basically when there is the strip of grass that's in between the curb and the actual walking section. And enhanced separated sidewalk, I didn't include a picture, but that would be kind of things like Oak Bay Avenue, where you've got benches or furniture or planters or something like that that's even more of a buffer between traveling cars and sidewalk users. So what are the next steps? So with our status quo funding of $200,000 per year, the kinds of things that we can do is, one corridor design study per year. We can do traffic calming on one road every 2 years, do about 100 meters of new concrete sidewalk, some curb extensions, and pedestrian controls. And if we were to increase to $1 million per year, we could be looking at 2 major intersections receiving traffic calming treatment each year, up to 5 kilometers of painted bike lanes, and a detailed corridor design. And on the sidewalk or pedestrian facilities side, we could be looking at 600 meters of new concrete sidewalk, more curb extensions, and more pedestrian controls. And so if we were to proceed with a program with an increased level of funding, we kind of outlined what we would need to do, which is look at a preliminary project list, consult the community, consult the council table on what those proposed projects are, develop detailed designs and apply for grants. And, if there was a willingness on the part of council, we could actually come back with a go, no-go decision on those projects once they have been costed and once we had received word on the grants. And I put a question slide, but I should have put a now Director Haran provide some concluding thoughts slide. Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Haran. I'll try and get your name right.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to add a couple of points here at the end of the presentation, just to highlight a couple of the key takeaways, at least from my perspective. The first one being is from the perspective of engineering and public works, our basic assumption here in the last couple of years, based on our direction from you, is that the community improvements related to transportation have been in 2 chunks: transportation safety and active transportation. But as a whole, we've been trying to approach that these would be kinds of projects like sidewalk improvements, traffic calming, bike lanes, active transportation in general, people-oriented versus trying to make it better for cars in general. And that's been the general approach. But I wanted to highlight that it's a broad definition, that active transportation, which is why we brought it up at the beginning of the discussion. The other thing I wanted to just quickly mention, just to highlight specifically, is that the current program that we've briefed you and the public on in terms of capital program, so this 500,000 or so of transportation safety capital funding and the 200 or so thousand of active transportation represents our status quo. So there are improvements, but they do kind of represent the steady state or a slight improvement over the last few years. But any discussion of new infrastructure, whereas what we've been talking about a lot in the last few years around asset management and capital renewal of infrastructure related to clean water, existing transportation, natural assets, facilities, is around renewal of our currently existing infrastructure. So there is a distinction there, and we wanted from a staff perspective just to offer that advice as you make governance decisions about the way forward, to weigh in the existing commitments versus creating new commitments and meeting new needs going forward. And the last thing I just wanted to mention was just no matter what council's decision on this program is going forward, we do have execution challenges related to resources and the way forward. So with the currently the direction we received from you around capital infrastructure renewal, we're pretty unique across the province, I think, in terms of our commitment to renewal and asset management, and the recognition of the sheer scope of the challenge that's ahead. Related to the infrastructure that currently exists, that whole process of defining requirements, doing the designs, and then doing the construction and making sure we're doing the right projects and doing them efficiently is a big challenge for Oak Bay going forward. So we just wanted to emphasize this whole idea of new infrastructure and how it fits into this existing challenge that we have ahead of us. The final point I wanted to make, thank you for giving me a moment to speak on this issue, is just we often, smaller communities often get compared to the larger communities related to active transportation programs and what they've managed to achieve. And I just wanted to point out that in many of the communities nearby, they definitely were able to fund some of their capital through grant programs, but a lot of their operational outcomes, the time spent focused on developing these active transportation projects, was taken from in-house resources, their operational resources. So that means essentially they're deferring some of their current maintenance needs, their current needs to be dealt with in the future so they could get on with projects that their councils decided were the priority. So that doesn't mean that's good or bad. It just means it's one way to get these things done. And we wanted to make sure that we're highlighting that we do have commitments in terms of our day-to-day services around water, sewers, and storm, and then the transportation system. So that was our aim tonight, was to meet some of the requirements that you asked for around options analysis for active transportation infrastructure, and we're just happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haran. I'm sure there are some, so I'm going to go to questions, not comments at this time, then we'll go to the public, and then we'll come back here for motions or for comments. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka. I'll start a speaking list.
Well, thank you very much. So questions only, you're saying?
Yes, please.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you so much for the presentation. And I very much appreciate you clarifying that Council did not approve what was suggested on slide 2. What was approved was that we look at funding it from surplus, not that we allocate $1 million per year. There was a mix-up on the minutes, I understand, at the time, but that's what the Council actually approved. So the question, or at least one of the things I wanted to point out, on slide, where is it? The slide for the Henderson. I happen to live up in the Henderson area, so I know a little bit about the history there. The Henderson, what you call a Henderson Road Shoulder Bikeway, its official name is the Oak Bay Local Motion Henderson Road Bike Lane, opened September 2008 by the province and Oak Bay, Christopher Costin. There's a sign commemorating it right next to Camosun College. Unfortunately, it needs a little bit of brushes cut away to see the sign. It's buried in there, but yes, that was sort of paid for partially by the province. There was a recommendation to remove the time restrictions, but I'm aware of at least one riot that occurred when Oak Bay attempted to remove the time restrictions, and the council of the day backed away from that decision because the public in the area would not allow it. And right now there is a wonderful détente going on with respect to bikes and by day and cars by night. And that may be the theme of Oak Bay as we go forward. So I just wanted to sort of start from that perspective, and at some point I'll have some motions to bring forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. No questions. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson. And Councillor Appleton, did you want to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Rennick and Mr. Haran, for this report. I think it really helps clarify, for me at least, the everything that's encompassed in this, and certainly some of the cost factors, because I think quite often members of the public don't appreciate fully just how much some of these items do cost us. If I could, I'll try to figure out a way to phrase this so it makes sense. But Mr. Haran, recently you talked about capital and increasing experience of failure of some of our existing systems and the need for increasing capacity of our capital projects. You also spoke tonight about by increasing this, it really is addressing essentially not just replacing status quo, but actually incorporating new assets into this. So could you perhaps give me a comment on what the risks are of either recurring expense or undepreciated capital costs if we took on the new assets, we increased the spending, and we have increasing unplanned replacement of infrastructure. Is there a way of managing that risk? Would there be more throwaway costs if we tried to increase this and it wasn't keeping pace with the capital infrastructure replacement program? Does that make sense?
Mr. Haran?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. through you to Councillor Patterson, that's a very tough question to answer. And I think the reason why it's a tough one to answer is it really depends on what the program ends up looking like. And I think Council, part of the report tonight, the recommendation is the staff is seeking some guidance around what the program outcomes should be. We know that it's not likely going to be decided fully tonight. There's multiple discussions that need to be had. We needed to present this information as part of the process to define what the outcomes are going to be. But I think that when it comes to things like increasing funding for whether it's expanded sidewalks or replacing sidewalks that currently exist in terms of pedestrian infrastructure, a lot of I don't want to presuppose the outcomes of the pedestrian sidewalk master plan, but a lot of the conclusions there will be to improve what already exists. So that kind of falls into that gray area of, yes, it's new funding, but it does replace older infrastructure. And then there's also, and that's one side where you don't have a whole lot of increasing costs of operations and maintenance that are added that you normally would when you put in new infrastructure. On the other hand, if you are going to do something like create kilometers worth of separated bike lanes, then yes, you then have maintenance requirements that come with that new assets, the same way as if you put new pipes in the ground, you have to start planning for the maintenance requirements. So that means potentially new equipment. So it might mean things like new street sweepers that can sweep those lanes properly, which we currently don't have. It means potentially additional maintenance people that go and make sure that the signs are still there and the paint's refreshed and so on. So I think staff's responsibility as the program, as your direction about the program, as council's direction about the program becomes clearer, we need to incorporate the impact to operations and maintenance with the capital program options. So when you see here's a project that can be delivered with the currently approved budget, or here's some options for projects, staff should be providing you as well the 20 or 30-year outlook on the operations and maintenance, so additional people, additional equipment, and how to sustain and maintain that new infrastructure going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Horan. I have Councillor Appleton and Braithwaite.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I've got several questions, so I'll probably just ask you to loop back around to me. I'll cede the floor in a little bit. I guess I'm just making the comment of, well, where do you start with this? I appreciate the content and I appreciate the context. I guess I would make the comment to start that active transportation infrastructure and meeting active transportation goals is written into the OCP, and it isn't just a capital expenditure for the sake of transportation improvements, but also helps to meet our greenhouse gas targets and to address the fact that this council has declared a climate emergency. So active transportation infrastructure addresses the single most important emissions component of in the CRD from individual municipalities, and that's individual transportation. So I would just offer that point for context. And I was just wondering, and I don't know whether to direct this to Mr. Rennick or Mr. Horan, so I'll just leave that open. Can you speak, please, to the possibility the increased funding would allow us the ability to essentially plan and become shovel ready with projects, exactly as you referred to in your report? The increased funding would get us closer and have funds set aside to take advantage of grants.
Mr. Rennick?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Councillor Appleton. Yes, an increase in the level of funding would make it easier to have shovel-ready projects, because with more funding available, some of that funding could be committed to project designs as opposed to simply spending it on projects that are immediately implemented. With the current level of funding, you don't necessarily want to commit half of the year's funding to a design for a project that would only be built if you received a grant. But with a greater increase with the proposed increased funding, you could spend some money on design and still be putting new curb drops and new pedestrian beacons in, so you could kind of get the best of both worlds there.
Thank you, Mr. Rennick. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And so just to follow up on that, I appreciate Mr. Rennick's comments. Just to follow up on that, it's fair to say that with the existing level of status quo funding, that we find ourselves in a bit of a catch-22 because we don't have enough funding to apply resources to develop plans for shovel-ready projects. So we're going to continue to miss out on grant opportunities if we don't expand those resources. We don't have enough resources currently available to us to develop the plans to even take advantage of a grant. Is that correct?
Mr. Haran?
Through your worship, in some aspects, yes. I think a better way to describe it is that the process is slower. So I think with the current levels of funding, our current capital planning around transportation is that we have a certain amount of funding set aside to do development work in terms of designs, getting projects ready. But maybe it takes us 3 years to develop project A and 3 more years to develop project B. With higher levels of funding, maybe it allows us to do A and B in 1 year, and then based on council's direction, we can pick one of those projects, and the cycle happens more quickly. So the part of the question is the program funding also talks about the funding levels and the outcomes that council decides on this. It talks about schedule as well. How quickly do we want to expand the program or not?
Mr. Haran, go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just with respect to, I'm acknowledging the comments that are made about the expansion of infrastructure, basically our infrastructure replacement plan that's happening right now, and the importance of continuing with that and the importance of emphasizing that. I guess further to the planning aspect for active transportation, with some increased funding to the program, in terms of how you select and prioritize programs, I would envision something that would take into account where we're going to be doing infrastructure projects and potentially using that as a bit of a prioritization matrix for how we implement active transportation. So I can see a concern being raised that you would not want to implement active transportation infrastructure, obviously on a street that was going to be dug up in short order. I don't think engineering would ever do that, but in terms of the prioritization, how do we identify projects as laid out in your slides, and sort of point one, the preliminary list of projects, wondering whether you could just speak to how we might synchronize what we plan to do already as part of infrastructure renewal and combine that with active transportation infrastructure.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Mr. Rennick?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Council. That is always part of the project planning process. We had intended, and we still intend to, make a presentation to Council on the overall project prioritization. How do we pick projects? What do we do? But generally, you start with the underground first. So, when we look at a given street, do we need to do the water main? Do we need to do the sewer? Do we need to do the storm? Once that's done, then we can look at, is the pavement structure in good shape? Can we just get away with repaving the asphalt? So really, whenever we're looking at a given project, we're always looking at what else needs to be done in this area. And so that's not something that would need to change. That's basically something that's already done, because we are cognizant of, you're not going to go and paint new bike lanes and then next year be ripping them up again. So it is a fair question, but that's certainly something that does form part of our planning process.
Thank you, Mr. Rennick. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate your indulgence here. And just to follow up on that, and I appreciate that, just to follow up on that comment, there are conversely potentially efficiencies of scale to do 2 projects at once when you're doing the subsurface or doing resurfacing on a road. If active transportation is considered in that project beforehand, then while you have your machinery and you have your forces deployed, then there's efficiencies of scale and implementation. Do I have that right?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. If you already had to rip up the road surface, do you put back what was there before, or do you put something else back? There's absolutely an efficiency there.
Thank you, Worship. Just one more question and I'll cede the floor. I just wanted to ask a question. Right now, what's presented in here, and I understand that it's challenging for staff because what is contemplated can exist on a sliding scale, that there was previously a discussion at the council table to potentially increase up to $1 million. So what's presented here is a status quo and $1 million, and I totally understand that. But just to confirm, if there is the motion, which is not actually to move to $1 million, but is to explore expanded funding, that expanded funding could sit along essentially a continuum that would be guided by more detailed information about project priorities that staff would provide as part of the next budgeting cycle. Do I have that correct?
Mr. Haran? Both our staff at home, if you can't see them, are pointing at each other, so I'm just going to pick one. Go ahead, Mr. Haran.
Thank you, Your Worship. Based on this one is a challenging report for Mr. Rennick and I to put together as we thought about how best to provide the information that's required, to incorporate all that we know about what the council and the community has said about this topic, and to provide some recommendations about the way ahead. So there was we called it a little bit of a chicken and the egg challenge, because we didn't want to go too far down planning out the program, which is why the report talks about the program charter, which was initially part of the deliverables, is not done yet, because we realize we can't finish that until we get a little bit more guidance from the council. But then again, we have to provide some information about what it might look like before we can ask for that guidance. So we've tried to narrowly balance a way forward. And one of the ways that we realized that we could do this is we say, yes, absolutely. The two extremes, so the current program as it is in the 5-year plan, we're underway with what's happening next year, and we know what we're going to do the year after and the year after for the roughly 700,000 or so of the total transportation funding. If that was the direction from council, we know what we're doing, and off we go. And yes, there's more meetings in the future to talk about prioritization, what those projects might be, but generally the scope of what has to be done is well understood by us. And then if it was the other extreme, the 1 million per year of funding, then we know what that would look like too. I think the middle ground is that, as Councillor Appel talks about, the sliding scale is there is a way to provide some direction to staff that says the council wants to do an expanded program, but that, so say for the development phases of projects, but that later there are decision-making points in the 5-year plan, and at specific points, stage gates is what they're called, where council reviews potential projects and says, yes, we want to fund project A, project B for delivery next year or in year, or yes, we will fund it if there is grant funding that is, so yes, go ahead and take that project, we want to implement it, go apply for the grants, and then if the grants are received, then we have the equivalent of a larger program, but not necessarily all funded from sources within the district states. They might be funded from the grant. So there's a middle ground. But I think what staff is looking for tonight is a bit of guidance on, is the current program what the council would like to see as going forward, or are there expanded options? Is there greater outcomes that are desired, so that we can prepare that information for strategic priorities and 5-year plans and so on in the coming months?
Thank you.
I'll cede the floor, Your Worship.
I'm going to do it just before I hand it off to other councillors here for a second. I just want to do a follow-up on that answer, just for our clarification, because obviously we're not approving anything tonight. This is really to give some direction in terms of what we're looking at and what options will come back. You talked about that in the model that you were putting forward there sounded almost like a capital plan where we sort of allocate money and whatever that looks like in the capital plan. Maybe that could be an increasing amount each year till we hit our targets. It could look at different things in our financial planning. Is that the crux of this, so that would sort of be seen as an investment in capital over the years and drawn down out of reserves as needed as projects came up? Or is there some allocation required here to also say, you touched on the operational need for actually doing some of the design work and some of the other pieces that is more sort of steady state that has to go on? So is in the financial planning pieces, as Councillor Appleton was talking about these pieces, can you give it any sense of allocation of capital versus operational and the model that you'd be sort of looking for? If this body was to say, yes, we'd like to see some, like, what would that kind of look like in that breakdown? Sorry, it's a bit of a complicated question, Mr. Haran.
Yes, Your Worship. I think I have the answer if I understand the question correctly, but it's going to feel like I'm in a tennis match a little bit, because we're definitely in the stage where, we've in the previous discussions around capital program for all of the infrastructure, and in this one tonight specifically about active transportation and transportation safety, we're capable of doing what council directs us to do, assuming the resources are assigned and the direction is given about what the outcomes are meant to be. Like, that's a successful outcome would be, this is what we want to see the program to look like, and here's the funding and resources required and the timeline related to it, and then it can be done. But there are risks and some trade-offs that have to happen that have to be discussed as part of it, because I think one of the things that we're concerned about from a staff perspective is that we're not clear about the potential risks or the downsides or the challenges, so that expectations are not are higher than they should be around the whole program, capital-wise, infrastructure, maintenance, and so on. So I think the answer to your question is we do need to see, we need to hear from council about what the desired program looks like, and then going forward, and then staff is able to then respond to some of that direction from the council as a table to say, okay, well then here's how we could make that work, including how to fund it, what the breakdown of capital versus operations and maintenance would be, timelines around that program. So we just need a little bit more direction from council on what that might look like.
That's fair. Thank you for that. So direction now, details if the direction is given after the fact, and budget approvals later. Okay, thank you for that. I had Councillor Braithwaite. And then Councillor Zelkin, did you have your hand?
I will have some more questions.
Okay, go ahead. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks so much. I think this is going to be a lob back to you, Mr. Haran, because I think you may have already answered this question, but I just want to clarify. Because we did talk about the $200,000 a year to the $1 million a year, and that is a big difference, you're right. So is there a spot in there, and you may have answered this already, where staff feels it's best? Because how I'm looking at it is, you know, I want to be able to build at a greater pace than what we have in the past. But I also want to weigh in the other asks on the money that we get. So is there like a sweet spot in there that you're thinking of, or are you just going to lob that right back to me?
Tennis game indeed. Here we go, Mr. Haran.
Your Worship, unfortunately, no, I don't think I can answer that one because it really isn't up to me or to staff to weigh on a sweet spot. We hope to try to provide as much information as possible on what can be delivered for the various levels. And by all means, if we haven't done that, we'd love to take the opportunity to expand more or provide information. But our recommendations on this one can't be about, well, it should be this or that. It could be shaped in the future in the form of, well, given this, what does that look like? Because there are some options in here where the final number for what the program funding is and the outcomes related, say, whether it's $500 or $1 million, doesn't necessarily mean that it's $1 million that comes straight from taxes or from the reserves or from surplus or from grants. So that's an option that can be talked about. There has to be a way to talk about what the community and what you as a council want to see, and so we've used the money at the budget number as a model for how to describe what to achieve, but it's not a perfect way to talk about it. And it's the same thing. You can't say 5 kilometers of bike lanes is what we want to build, because, well, what kind of bike lanes? And so that's why it's very complicated, actually. So we've done our best to provide as much information and to respond to what we've seen as the direction from you, and then hoping that we can, knowing it's a challenging conversation to have. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. Yeah, and as far as the shovel-ready projects go, I mean, that's, for me, the way to go. I remember back when there's a funding opportunity for Henderson, and we happened to have something right in the bag that we were able to hand over, and we got most of the funding for an expansion up at Henderson, and we've had a couple of other projects like that. So I'm pleased to hear that. My last question would be, so when we look at increasing, if we look at increasing the funding for this, I want to know how that affects, will, in the reports that you bring back to us, will that tell us how that it's going to affect the staffing requirements? Because obviously as we increase funding and we want to have these shovel-ready projects ready to go, it's going to take away from staff time. And so are we going to have to add more staff? Do we have any idea on that, or is that something that's going to come back in these reports?
Mr. Rennick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to council, part of the project charter process is talking about what is the staff time, and is that existing staff, or is that potentially bringing in consultants? And so again, to borrow Director Haran's tennis analogy, that is going to depend on kind of what level of program we go for, because we can service a status quo program with existing staff. A $500,000 per year, $500,000 per year program versus $1 million per year program is different levels of staffing.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions here? And then I'll go back to, I'm going to go to the public to get some any comments or questions. I'll come back to this table. Go ahead, Councillor. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Patterson. Oh, you've both spoken. First time, go ahead, Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Mayor. Just in listening to this discussion, I think it's a really worthwhile discussion to be having. Just for clarification, perhaps either Mr. Rennick or Mr. Haran can answer. Our present funding model and asset management plan is based on replacing the status quo. But is that realistic in a changing world where we're compared to other districts also? So how much can we just do the status quo as to having to face the reality of improving on the status quo as we go along through capital projects? And is that something that staff have considered?
Go ahead, Mr. Han.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think the best way to answer that question is to look back at some of the discussions that we've had in this room in the past few months around the program. I don't know of very many municipalities that are in the position where Oak Bay is now, which is having reckoned with the asset management challenge, and then council and the community making tough decisions about future funding, and then making an explicit direction to expand the capital program and to resource that demand. So the point I'm trying to make is that there aren't a lot of other municipalities to look to, that there are places that have temporarily expanded their program in response to grants and so on, and you can see how that's done, but that's not a long-term change. And so Oak Bay is about to do what I think many municipalities are going to be doing in the near future. I don't know how soon, but soon. So there are no easy answers to that question, and I think part of what we've tried to recommend around the capital infrastructure program in general, this whole idea of a project management framework, is in the past, you have not, as a governing body, had to see or oversee the program from infrastructure very much, because there wasn't, there was a handful of projects happening per year, and then you got the oversight you needed to have during the budgeting process. But now, the outcomes, like how much work is being done, what is the planning for those for that work, and then is it meeting the community's needs? Is it enough? Is it too much? And are the risks being managed around all of the risks that we briefed at this table? That's discussions that will be happening at the council table in the future. So the answer, sorry for the long-winded part of this, is I think we don't know enough, and I don't know that anyone knows enough about really the how we're going to do this, 2 years, 3 years from now. We just know what the next steps need to be. And we know that we need to provide the information transparently about where we are and where we're going, and have regular discussions with you and with the public about the status, so that we can make course corrections going forward. So the recommendations tonight about an active transportation program, aspects of a program, even an expanded one, can be done within our current commitments, but we're just cautioning as well that it needs to be done with a balanced approach, and knowing that it's not that there may be some downsides, and there may be times where staff is coming back to say, actually, we're a little pinched and we need some guidance on priorities, or we need more resources to get all of the commitments completed. And that could not just next year, that could be multiple years going forward.
Thank you for that. I'll go to Councillor Zelka for questions, and then we'll go to the public, I believe. So go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to finally get my head clear enough that I can ask some questions. First question is for, through you, of course, to Director of Engineering. I'm trying not to blame him for his success at the new position that he'll be moving towards, but as a result of you moving, we're going to have to make some additional hires. Before, in some of your earlier presentations, we've already approved, if I remember correctly, at least approved the process to hire on 5 staff in your area, with respect ostensibly for the upland sewer separation, but potentially for other engineering projects, maybe this as well. So it's great that you have additional staff. I would hope that those hands, plus your replacements, we'll see what happens, will provide the opportunities. And I agree with my councillor colleagues to have grants or to have shovel-ready projects. It seems reasonable. With some of the discussions, some of the decisions we made in the past, for example, when this item came forward, and the Director of Financial Services scared the bejesus out of me, and I'll get to that in a moment, with some of the suggestions on the tax increases that might be needed. the suggestion was that we could possibly use grants and use those opportunities. And then as we change the roads in the uplands, as we change the roads in Monterey, that we've already approved the Monterey changes with bike lanes. I get that McNeil changes with bike lanes, excuse me. I'm really pleased about that. So basically, as we go, since we're a small municipality, that's what I thought we were moving towards. So I'm a little surprised with this suggestion where we're back at $5 million, because I thought we had dealt with that. But well, here's the question, and I'll probably have to refer it through to the Director of Financial Services. With the 5 new staff and possibly new admin staff alluded to in the Rising report that was released today, plus the fire hall, protective services buildings, and many other assets that must be replaced. And knowing that only 8% of Oak Bay adults commute to and from Oak Bay via bike, is it only going to be 2% tax increase to get to $1 million per year, or is it potentially going to be higher than that? So the question through to the Director of Financial Services, in your report back in 2021, you noted there is no funding stream for this $5 million for the active transportation. Existing reserves are dedicated, and most of the infrastructure reserves are for infrastructure replacement. Using those dedicated reserves would plunge the district's funding into further unsustainable territory. The only way we could do this is through a tax increase. Has that position changed? I'd like to ask.
Sure, thank you, Councillor Zelka. I'm just going to try and get to questions a little bit quicker. I appreciate the comments, but we're going to be running out of time in this meeting if we're not careful. Mr. Payne, you're on deck for this one. Go ahead, please.
Good evening, Your Worship. Can you hear me well enough?
We can. You're a little quiet. If you could just speak up, that would be helpful.
Great, absolutely. I would say that there's really 3 options in terms of increasing funding by the incremental $800,000. And that would be a tax increase, which could be spread out over however many years council wish to do that. That would be a tax increase of 2.7%. Or the budget could be completely grant dependent, so it wouldn't be spent unless we achieve grants to that extent. Or you would have to reduce funding elsewhere and use that funding for this, such as reducing transfers to reserve for the replacement of our existing infrastructure, or a combination of those. So in plain speak, those are really the 3 options that council would choose from to fund an incremental increase here.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Councillor Zelka?
Last question, I guess, would be more in the engineering area. The last time it was measured, it was 8% of Oak Bay adults commuted. Has that number changed? Is there any way that we could find out who we're servicing here with this active transportation that appears to be focused only on bike lanes? Thank you.
Mr. Horan?
Through your worship, Mr. Rank might jump in if he has the actual number, but I think staff was very careful not to focus on bike lanes or sidewalks or any of those things. That's why we said very clearly that we were focused on people-powered transportation options, and then our whole active transportation budget and transportation safety is in that focus. I think the second part there is some communities have set goals as part of what their council and the community wants as outcomes to change mode share. And that has been talked about in this region, but that's not necessarily an explicit goal in Oak Bay. So definitely that there are some that think that that's what we should do, but I don't see that necessarily, at least in recent council discussions, that our outcomes are related to that. Now, there are some discussions about definitely, as Councillor Appin was talking about earlier, the climate change outcomes and so on. So the active transportation strategy from 2011 has a bunch of information in it, and there was a lot of discussions at the council table, but not as much clear council direction to staff to go forth and execute an active transportation program that achieves the following outcomes. So that's part of what we've been trying to do from a staff perspective, is to be clear so that expectations can be managed and that we can deliver on what council's desires are in this area.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Last question, if I may. So the understanding is that in 12 to 13 years, cars, gas cars, will be outlawed, and there'll be electric cars only in Oak Bay. Also, there is an initiative out there to reduce our speed limits throughout Oak Bay, other than the arterials, to 30. moving the bicycles into the range where we could actually start making some revenue from them by handing out speeding tickets potentially, as they did in Salish. So I'd like to ask, how's it going on that 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit initiative with the province and Salish and Victoria?
Mr. Haran, do you want me to answer that, or do you? Go ahead if you wish.
Your worship, if you have the answer, I'm sure I can add to something that if there's needs to be added, for sure.
At this point, there's been no uptake from the province of taking that on as a pilot project. There have been some verbal interest at 40 kilometers an hour. When the ask was changed to 30, they essentially just said this is not a viable piece. I don't think of anything official, but it's essentially died on the vine. Thank you. I'm going to go to, just for the public's interest, I only have one hand raised at this point, and so I'm going to go to that person. If there's anybody else who wishes to address council on this matter, you're more than welcome to do so. If you're on the 855 number, you'd hit *9 to raise your hand. So Ms. Smart, welcome. And if you just give your name and municipality of residence, and then you're free to address council.
Hi, can you hear me this time?
We can, thank you.
Yeah, okay, great. It's Carrie Smart, and I am a resident of Oak Bay. And I would like to speak in support of increased funding for active transportation. This decision is not about making things better for existing cyclists. It's about getting new cyclists, walkers, and rollers out of their cars to reduce carbon emissions, because we have an additional 20% reduction that is required for greenhouse gas emissions under transportation under our current goals, according to the CRD's recent reports. In April 2019, this council declared a climate emergency, and today is an opportunity to show this commitment. We are all aware of our community's specific vulnerability to sea level rise, flooding, and tsunamis. 2030 is fast approaching, and our report card should give you alarm. In the spring of 2020, our Climate Action Working Group put forward, based on the fact that 40% of our municipality's carbon footprint is based on on-road transportation, and this is the biggest impact we could have, would be to work at our active transportation and getting people out of their cars. We must provide climate-friendly options. I am hearing, going door to door every night, that there are so many residents who need us to step up to make this possible for them. They're willing to get on board. And this is just, you can see by the overwhelming letters of support that our community is ready for this. Cycling helps mental health, physical health, climate action, and independent and safe routes for our kids to get to school. This will not wait. The climate action is not going to wait until we think about this. And I think it's important we interleave this with our infrastructure renewal. This is potentially the single most important action that the municipality can make towards meeting our climate goals. Please take it seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smart. We've had a few other hands pop up here, so I'm going to go to I have someone with the name Ian Graham. If you can just introduce your actual name speaking and municipality of residence. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch and Council. Ian Graham. I'm from Salish, but I'm speaking today on behalf of the Friends of Boker Creek Society, and our membership includes residents from Oak Bay, Salish, and other capital region municipalities. Yeah, I just want to speak in support of recommendation 1 in the active transportation program. I do want to really quickly acknowledge the district for their winning the UBCM Award of Excellence for the district's sustainable infrastructure plan. You know, it doesn't sound very glamorous, but asset management planning, it's really a critical role of local government. So a quick thanks to the directors of finance and engineering. Really excellent piece of work. Regarding item 9.2, I know this isn't the time to get into real details of specific projects, but I do want to just quickly update you on a joint initiative that we're working on with the Community Association of Oak Bay under Oak Bay's Cool Kit Climate Action Program. We sent you all a copy of the proposal yesterday and an invitation to our Rivers Day event on Sunday. It really involves it fits into this program, I think, really well. Involves reimagining the upper parking lot between at the rec center between B Street and the tennis bubble right next to Boker Creek, filling in the gap in that Boker Creek walkway that currently exists on that 100-meter section. So linking the existing walkway downstream all the way to Monterey Firefighters Park, and then upstream to Cadbur Bay, Foul Bay Road, and north through into Victoria and Salish. Linking that those important destinations like the Recreation Center, Oak Bay High School, the business district at the intersection there, Cadbur Bay. Pedestrian safety really addresses that. You've got Marriott Gardens, Shannon Oaks, like lots of seniors migrating across that parking lot right now, and there's no connection. And really trying to combine it with creek restoration and address the ongoing slope failure of the banks. It's in the engineers' report there, really strong policy alignment with the 2014 OCP, the active transportation strategy, as well as the Boker Creek blueprint, all very specific policies about completing this link. And it also really helps to reinforce some of your healthy community goals. That recreation, for example, it's not just about what happens inside the walls of the rec center, but it can also be about, how you get there and all of those linkages with greenhouse gas emissions reductions, which, other speakers have referenced. One really quick thing around resourcing, really encourage you to look holistically. So it's not always about more funding, it's actually using funding, differently. And a good example of that is where council approved $300,000 for repaving the upper parking lot or the parking lot at the rec center and the ongoing slope failure. And so, if you've got a shovel-ready project, you can look at maybe using the existing resources differently. And then lastly, just around, again, I think others, including the director of engineering, mentioned it, really integrating active transportation with other things like safety, emissions reductions, community health. So in closing, I want to invite you and staff, members of the public, to our BC Rivers Day event, Sunday, September 25th, 2 to 4. It'll be in the upper parking lot, south end of the Oak Bay Rec Center next to Boker Creek. Free ice cream, and we'll have a draft proposal on hand and really look forward to some of your feedback for the public. More details at bokercreek.org. Just go to the events tab.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. I'll allow that plug. We are trying to stay on topic here, but I appreciate the good work that you're doing there on the Cool Kit side of the equation. So thank you for that and for your comments tonight. I'm going to move over to the person online who has a name of Mark Edward So, which then it goes ... Please just state your name for the record and municipality of residence, and welcome to the meeting.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can.
My name is Mark Edwardson. My residence is Oak Bay. Like the previous couple of speakers, I just want to quickly speak in favor of exploring an increase in active transportation funding. Simple fact is that Oak Bay is falling behind other municipalities in terms of safe transportation infrastructure, particularly as places like Salish and Victoria significantly invest in safe sidewalks, safe bike lanes, etc. We are becoming a bit of a dead zone, and I think that's becoming very apparent where at municipal borders you see transitions from proper, safe bike lanes that are accessible to all users to kind of crummy sidewalks, no traffic calming, no protected bike lanes of any kind, and bike lanes that turn off at 7 o'clock at night, which is a little bit weird because that is kind of when you would want safe bike lanes. So I think we really are in need of more funding. I really encourage you to support doing whatever you can to increase the amount of money that we spend on it, be it through tax dollars, be it through grant money, try to explore whatever avenues are possible to increase the amount of money we're spending on this safe infrastructure. I'm sympathetic to the fact that, this will probably require higher taxes in the long run to properly fund. I think, at the end of the day, we're going to have to just decide how much money are we willing to spend to save lives, right? That's what this is about. It's the fact that, we recently just had a collision where someone got hit by a 95-year-old driver. And, everyone was sort of bashing on the driver, but I have no doubt that unsafe infrastructure is playing a role in collisions that we see in our community. And I think that's a shame because we can change that. So I think that council should fund this. I think that we should do whatever we can to improve the state of our active transportation infrastructure. And I encourage you to do this as soon as possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Edwardson. I don't see any other hands raised, so is there someone in the, okay, is there someone in the chambers or just outside of chambers that wishes to come and talk to us? So we'll invite them in. Hello, it's the same rigmarole as you did before. If you just state your name, municipality, residence, and you're welcome to address us on this item.
My name is Carl Coria Martin, and through you, I'd very much like to thank Mr. Horan and Mr. Hackett for that report. As the council thinks about a strategy for priorities, I'm the father of a 7-year-old. She just started biking on her own bike to, I reside in South Oak Bay, to Margaret Jenkins. She will not ride on the sidewalk on McNeil. She will not ride in my vehicle to get to and from school. We're on bikes. And I hope that she attends Margaret Jenkins and then Monterey Middle and then Oak Bay High. And I really want your help getting her there alive. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. Is there anybody else on site or online? I don't see any. We still have the leftover hand up. If we could just have that lowered, and then we can just, I think that's it. Give a chance to anybody else to speak up, but I don't see any. And so I'm going to come back to this table. We have we've had questions, we've had answers, we've had public input. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the presentation and for all the comments and the honesty on where we stand on this issue. I really feel a sense of urgency from the correspondence I read, the majority of which said we have to get on with this. We have to put more resources into this issue. And I do agree and like the approach, which is the combination of transportation safety and active transportation. I think that's an excellent framework for these kinds of projects. I also want to point out, while Oak Bay had an active transportation plan introduced in 2011, to be fair, I think there were 2 areas where we stumbled, and it was just the way it was. And one was that we didn't manage expectations very well, I don't think, in the community at large. And second, until Mr. Horan and Mr. Rennick were hired, the department did not have a director who was a qualified engineer. So there were some internal challenges, I think, in implementing a plan like that.
Councillor Green, just as you're going into like motivation here, do you want to make the motion and then we can talk to a motion, or are you? So we can maybe just move receipt first and then we can get to a motion.
I'll move receipt, then I'll move it to Councillor Appleton, actually.
Okay, that's fine.
Sorry, I'll move receipt.
Move second. Is there any other discussion on receipt? Don't see any, so I'll call the question. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Zalka.
I apologize. Yes, I do have discussion. And in fact, I have a problem with the report. So this discussion, and now I'm going to move referral. But the discussion is that the report says that council decided in November 2021 to spend $1 million per year. Slides 2 and slide 6 said that council decided to do all sorts of things. We did not decide to do those things. I am worried that a future council or a future person is going to see these reports and said, oh, council decided that, therefore we have to move forward. And we didn't make any of these decisions that were in the report. So as a result of that, I wish to move that the item be referred back to staff to correct the report and to correct the two slides at least, so that it is in alignment with the minutes that were approved. Thank you.
So thanks for the motion there. There's sort of 2 parts to that, but just for procedurally, I'm not sure exactly what we can do here, but it's a motion to receive, so we have a report in front of us. The attachments and so forth, I know we have as we do the minutes, we can adjust the minutes, but we have a report here that is written as is. Can we receive and with the direction to correct the wording to reflect, or is that, do we need a motion to receive? I'm just trying to make sure I'm clear on my speeches. Mr. Coates?
Mayor Murdoch, members of council, so yeah, the motion to receive could be amended to give direction to staff to do something to the report if that was council's wish.
Councillor Zelka, would that suffice?
If staff, or sorry, council is willing to consider an amendment to the receipt motion to allow something such as this, I would be very open to that, as opposed to just shoving it back to staff. So
I'll make a suggestion on a motion then. I think the motion to amend to include direction to staff, just to review the wording to accurately reflect the previous direction of council, and then we'll leave that in your hands to make those corrections to go back to the minutes. Councillor Zelka, is that sufficient?
That would be sufficient with respect to the report and at least the 2 slides, yes.
Okay, so that's the motion to amend to include that request of staff to ensure that that wording is accurately reflected. Is there a seconder for that motion? Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on that motion to amend?
If you're willing to let me motivate, yeah. Essentially, I just want to make sure that that no future council feels that their hands are tied in terms of decisions that have been made by previous council. Since, as we know, for a new council coming in, the first thing you're told is everything the previous council decided, you've got to move forward with. So, I just wanted to make sure that it was very clear that we didn't actually make that decision yet until we get to budget for 2023. Thank you.
I think that's fairly clear, but Ms. Williams, is that to the amendment? Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I should have caught your attention a little earlier. With respect to the receipt of the report, really all that resolution does is says that you received the report. Certainly, council will receive reports over time that include recommendations and options that council won't agree with, but they form a part of the history and what was provided to council at the meeting. I'm not seeing anywhere in here where it indicated a previous resolution that's been misstated.
I guess without having to spend time tonight to go through and read it, I think the motion amended here is just to have staff review that to make sure it accurately reflects any, where it references previous council direction, that direction is accurate. And I don't want, going through it here is awkward. If you don't feel that's an appropriate piece, then we'll just have the motion to receive as is, and then maybe we can have a further motion. I'm not sure what that would look like to clarify that.
Thank you, Your Worship. The correct motion would just be a motion to receive. You cannot unreceive a document you've received in an agenda package.
It is, in fact, procedurally a non-necessary piece. It just gives clarity for the pieces. If we don't receive it, it is still received for us. We can't essentially refuse receipt. However, that being said, we can give direction to ensure that the written reports accurately reflect any errors and stuff are corrected. I just don't want to wordsmith at this table because this is the wrong place. I'm not going to go through and reread it and make sure that it was all compared to the direction pieces. So I just procedurally here want to make sure that we do the cleanest thing possible. And I think it's fair to, if Councillor Zelka is concerned that the wording doesn't reflect that we just have an ability to go through and have the staff just double check. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
A small clarification. I did provide to staff that CC'd to our CAO my concern with the wording and with the fact that there was a mix-up in the minutes in approximately November 21st, 2021. That was brought forward to staff. The staff did make a change to the minutes at that time, so the correct motions were actually brought forward and approved. However, this report and those 2 slides reflect the old wording that was in the minutes that were corrected. So I'd be fine to sit down and describe or explain the email with respect to that if it's necessary, but obviously not right now.
So I'm just going to, this is the fun part of your job here. Procedurally, if there's concern of something being on the record that isn't actually reflected, I don't want to get into whether it is or not. I just think we have a reasonable expectation of making sure that we're capturing that. Would appropriate motion then to be to receive, because we have received this, and then and so the motion right now is to amend the report to confirm that it reflects accurately the previous council direction. But if that's not in order, then I would just seek direction in terms of how. essentially, it's, the question from Councillor Zelka is why would it not be in order? And my understanding is that we receive what we receive here. It's just a procedural piece to make sure that it goes on the record. But I guess it forms part of the official record because it's referred then in the minutes as a receipt. So if this is a request to change the wording before it makes that final record, go ahead.
Well, Mayor Murdoch and members of council, I think the confusion that we're having here is reviewing the report and not seeing the reference that's being made in terms of what may not be accurately reflected. So I think that's sort of why we're not being as helpful as we'd like to be in terms of the process. But I just, would reiterate that procedurally council can do anything or nothing with this report, as you've indicated, Mr. Mayor. And I think that I can't speak on behalf of the CAO, but I think we're just a little uncertain about what location in the report is being referred to and whether that's actually reflective of the minutes or not.
I think the request is so
So certainly slide number 2 in the presentation says specifically, council seeks to increase active transportation program from the status quo to $1 million per year for 5 years. It declares that as a statement. We never voted on that and we never approved it. That's all I'm trying to say.
I believe that the motion here is to receive the report, not the presentation. So is there anything in the report itself that's a concern, Councillor Zelka?
Point of order, Mayor.
Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I can't find the wording in the report, and at this point in time, my motion is straightforward. It's just to receive the report. I read it, I've looked at it, I cannot find the wording that. Now, if it's a suggested tone, I think that's
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka, that you wish to.
All right, the background historical context. It says right here, council direction was to explore a program ranging from status quo of $200,000 per year for 5 years to, with a significantly expanded budget, to $800,000 per year for 5 years. We did not provide that direction to explore the program that goes from 200,000 million to 5 million. What we approved was to look at the program that had to do with surplus funds. To see what could be done with surplus funds. That's all we approved. We didn't approve the wording that's in here. That's all I'm trying to say.
So, Councillor Zelka, I'm not seeing here that was direction. It was my recollection of the direction was to explore options and bring that back, and that's the wording that's in here. So I think it is accurately reflective of the piece. It doesn't say it gave direction. It asked for directions for those pieces to come back here. So I don't think, and given that this is only the report is being received here, not the presentation, I think we can probably safely. So there's a motion, I believe, at the second. Yeah, there's a motion to amend to include that. I'm hearing from staff that's not an appropriate motion because we are receiving the report as is, and I don't hear that there's an error in here that needs to be corrected. So I don't. I'll leave it. If you wish to leave it standing, I'll call the question on the motion. Okay.
I'd like to leave it standing, please, so at least it'll appear in the minutes.
All right. So the motion made is to amend. To provide the opportunity for staff to correct any, or accurately reflect previous council decisions, is moved and seconded. I will then call the question on the motion to amend to include that wording. All those in favor? And all those opposed? I have Councillor Green, Braithwaite, Appleton, nay, and Murdoch opposed. That motion to amend fails, but thank you. And then we have the main motion, which is to receive. Not usually this complicated. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Zelka opposed. That carries. And then we move, Councillor Green, you were completed. I don't have a speaking list currently, but I had Councillor Appleton's arm up. Is there any other? Well, I'll let you make a motion if that's your wish, and then we can speak to a motion.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to move the staff recommendation.
And for anybody watching at home, that is that staff prepare an active transportation program based on increased levels of funding for consideration of approval by council as part of the 2023 to 2027 financial plan. You were free to motivate Councillor Appleton, and I'll go to a new speaking list.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just want to thank again staff for presenting, and as staff has ably called out, this is not an easy process. It does require some iterative thought, and it does require some input from council at different junctures. So I'm very pleased for the context that staff has offered in terms of coming forward with options, providing those project gates, those opportunities for council to weigh in on different stages of the project. This is very clearly a motion to seek to expand the active transportation funding and to explore different options. At our current status quo level, we have, as was discussed, we have no ability to explore what we might do with grants or how we might take advantage of other funds that are available to us. So we simply need to be able to get beyond status quo to be able to move in that direction. And I think that this is an interesting conversation to have. I appreciate Mr. Horan's comments and Mr. Rennick's comments. With respect to Mr. Horan and the entire engineering department has always contextualized really clearly for us what new infrastructure will imply in terms of costs for the district, that we are investing in keeping up with what we already have to fix. And I'm very, very conscious of that. I believe that with this particular topic, council is at a bit of a juncture in the sense that we do absolutely need to continue to invest in infrastructure and continue to make the investments that this council is committed to over the course of this term. There are certain things that will require that council cast its thoughts ahead and look at forward-facing new initiatives that are also equally important. We have a huge infrastructure challenge to meet. We will also need to consider those pieces of infrastructure which are necessary now and may go beyond fixing exactly what we have currently in place. And this, in my view, is what a modern and evolving community needs to invest in order to meet the challenges of climate change and in order to make a sustainable, livable community. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Zelka, Braithwaite, Green, and the Nay.
Thank you very much. Speaking in favor of the motion, I can certainly support a sliding scale and an approach, a cautious approach, that as we are changing roads out, as we're changing infrastructure out, that would be appropriate time to add in the sidewalks and potentially bike lane aspects. Got a question through you with respect to the debate. If I may ask a question to staff, is this a good time? We have a pedestrian and sidewalk master plan that's in process, which is part of this active transportation program, but I don't see anything specifically about bike lanes. Is there going to be a separate master plan, or is that existing master plan going to be folded into this program? How will we encompass all of the aspects within these concepts called master plans that are being used by our staff to marshal the resources? Please.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Rennick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to council, one of the next steps that we had identified is if this program is going to be approved, there does need to be a little bit of staff time spent basically on developing what that program is. And so we didn't want to presuppose what council or the community wanted. In the slide, we had shown here's what you could do with $1 million per year. And we basically did 50-50 pedestrian infrastructure and cycling infrastructure, but that was really for illustrative purposes. If we were to develop a program, really the first step in that program is going to be consulting with the public and with council on what are the priorities. We mentioned earlier that we do not have mode share targets as a municipality. Perhaps one of the things of this expanded program would be establishing mode share targets and establishing what exactly are we trying to deliver for the community. Councillor Zelka, you noted the mode share of cyclists who cycle to work. Is that necessarily the priority to increase that percentage? At the moment, there's no direction on that. So it's a little bit of a non-answer to the question. It's a little bit more of Mr. Horan's tennis of it's still not a fully defined program. We're seeking direction to create a fully defined program.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much. And noting that today, the Regional Emergency Management Program's tsunami alert program went live today at the provincial level and the regional CRD level. That's the program that basically said that we'll need to probably build a bridge from across McNeil down near Windsor Park. So we'll need to consider when we build that bridge for the sea level rise that, of course, it has bike lanes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I have Councillor Braithwaite. I'm going to go to Nay as the first-time speaker and then back to Green.
Thanks. I'm going to be speaking in favor of the motion, and I would reiterate Councillor Appleton's comments. I do think it's time that the municipality, the people in our municipality are telling us that it is time to build an active transportation network at a greater pace than what we have in the past. So I'm happy to support. Thank you.
Short and sweet. Thank you. Councillor Nay and then Green.
Thank you very much, and yeah, thank you to staff for bringing this to the council to have an opportunity to have some input in the future direction of this, and I appreciate the comments around the table and from the community, and it's really clear that this is timely. Maybe we've acted late as a council, but it certainly is timely now to move forward and expand this program as articulated as both a safety and active transportation plan. I guess, there's been some very good reasons around, reducing greenhouse emissions and also to, increase the safety and livability of our community. But I think as I stand back and think about our community and we are lagging behind in building this kind of infrastructure into our community, is that we have such a unique geography here where the landscape of this community is already set to be livable, walkable, rideable. But so it's kind of got the bones for that. And I think it's timely now where we enhance the infrastructure to, now that there's so much receptivity from the community for walking, for cycling, for scooters with our seniors, etc., to ramp up the infrastructure in a way that optimizes the bones of the community that we already have, to make it, to really enhance it. So I'm speaking in favor of the motion, and again, I appreciate all the comments and support from the council moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nay. Councillor Green.
Thank you. I was in mid-flight. I want to land now, and my landing is I support the motion, and I just wanted to say how much I appreciated what I consider an integrated approach, a holistic approach. I think it was Mr. Rennick that mentioned holistic. This isn't just about cycle lanes. This is about the way we move through Oak Bay and in Oak Bay. So thank you for that.
Just before I call the question, was any other hands up? I just make a couple comments. One, I do appreciate this to some seems a little perhaps later than we would like. I think, as was mentioned, was one of the speakers was the Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan, which we won the award for last week at UBCM. A little plug in there. Without that long-term financial planning to kind of guide us as to what our financial realities are and to kind of, and to frankly, have eaten some of those costs over the last few years to address it. It's very difficult to look at some of these other pieces, and so I'm very thankful for that foundational work that's been done. And I just want to echo the approach taken of the sort of the safety, the accessibility, the active transportation support. Those pieces are all one, and we can't lose them. And in fact, what I've seen over the last few years with the bump from 200 to 700,000 is an enormous increase in the number of curb cuts. And I mean, at a very basic level, if people can't even get off the curb to cross the street, we're not doing our jobs very well. So I think, we have to kind of keep that in mind of where this money will go. It goes to both foundational as well as net new improvements. So, yeah, and I also just, this gives council direction. Staff can't do any of this work without giving us some clarity. So this will at least now be in the discussion of the financial plan, and the next council will have to consider how fast and where to kind of put some money aside to help support it. But I think this clear direction will help that process. So very much in support of this, and I'm very appreciative of the work that's gone into it. And Mr. Horan, you touched on the fact that it was a hard one to write because we're kind of asking for direction without having the details. Can I just say I appreciate it coming back here to have that direction. I think it's important for us to have this conversation, to ask the questions, and make sure we've caught some of those early red flags, so that as those plans come forward, we're gonna be able to address them. So thank you for that. Any other discussion? Don't see any. I will call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you. That took us a long time to get through through that one, and we have more to go. So I'm going to just ask that we the next one, of course, is a big one, though. A lot of the discussion has happened in previous meetings. We are here for bylaws and permits. This is not subject to public input. We have Mr. Bull here as our Director of Community Building and Planning. I suppose I should probably hand it over to you so you can review the process to date and then what's in front of us. I will say my intention here is to walk through the bylaws in order. We can have a motion if that's appropriate. We can have debate and we'll go through them. I understand there's some desire to raise a piece on the parking facilities bylaw, so we'll deal with that when we get to that one. Assuming, of course, that the previous ones passed, because there's sort of a collection of the whole here, not any one piece. So, Mr. Bowl, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just maybe a couple of comments for the context of today's bylaws. One of the bylaws was technically the topic of the public hearing last week. That's the zoning bylaw amendment dealing with secondary suites. And there's 4 other bylaws that deal with other aspects around the suite of regulations, so to say, that deal with all aspects of planning around secondary suites. The zoning bylaw can receive third reading and adoption today, and the other bylaws are already at third, I believe, and could receive adoption today. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. So I'm happy to just do these in order, and I think the appropriate thing is, frankly, they are all very connected. So just in the interest of managing time, if we could perhaps get a motion on the floor for third reading, I think we'll just go around the table, have our say in terms of the overall package of things. I know we'll deal with the one item on bylaw 4823 separately as a piece, if that's...
Just, if I may, Mr. Mayor, it's just that the motion I have to be considered by council is at 10.5, and should it be moved forward, then my understanding is that 10.2 bylaw 4826 would then become obsolete. So I'm just wondering if there's a recommendation about the order in which we deal with them.
Sure. I think what we'll do is we'll do bylaw, the first one, 10.1, bylaw 4825 first. We'll have that discussion. And then for third reading, and if that passes, then adoption. I'll then move 10.5 as the piece, and then we can move to 10.2. I'm happy to do that. That's the desire, but I think that will guide that piece. So, Councillor Braithwaite, you wish to make a motion?
Sure, I'll move that zoning amendment bylaw 2022 number 4825 be given third reading.
Second.
Moved and seconded, so it's live. If it's amenable by council, I would probably just go around the table quickly and just get people's any additional comments. We've had a public hearing, we've had lots of debate, but I think this is a reasonable chance for people to make comments prior to the vote. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Could you just, I can't see the wording for 4825, I'm sorry. Can you just remind me?
I'll reread. The motion is that the zoning amendment bylaw 2022 number 4825 be given third reading. This is the bylaw that was the subject of public hearing previously and is in front of us now for third reading. Okay. And if third reading passes, then adoption.
I will support this, thank you.
And is there any, do you have anything else to add, or is that?
At the moment, that's it, thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Councillor Braithwaite, anything to add?
No, I'm just supportive, thank you.
Councillor Appleton?
Also in support, Your Worship, thank you.
Sorry. Councillor Zelka?
In support.
Lene?
I'm supportive. I wish we could have put an outdoor sitting place for the secondary suite, but that wasn't to be. But overall, I'm supportive of it.
Councillor Patterson?
I'm in support.
Well, that was reasonably succinct. I, however, have a little novel to read. I just want to make a couple of quick comments. Thanks to the public. There's been a lot of public input on this process, and I think it's important to hear that this has been we've taken a lot of time, I think, to hit the pros and cons, and I just want to I'm not going to go through the concerns raised in the public hearing. I think they were some valid ones, and I think we've done our best to address them. If I go back to the official OCP survey where people were in suite, it was sort of assuming key issues like tree protection, parking, traffic noise, and I look at the way the approach here with the same housing envelope and the ability to waive the paving to protect trees, so everything is status quo. The parking, the current model, I appreciate it, it'll come for discussion, but that model of having a car, bike parking, either or, just to ensure neighborhood parking impacts are minimized. The traffic, I think, with the specific incentives for active transportation and the clear ban on short-term rentals, the car traffic will be minimized. The noise with the owner occupation provides for responsible landlord oversight. And in the terms of neighborhood character, again, no change in housing forms. And I think a lot of care and attention made to make sure that we're addressing the will of the community in achieving this. So I really express my appreciation to council and to staff for the work that's been gone on to get it to this point. So I'm ready to call the question for third reading. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
I'll move that the zoning amendment bylaw 2022 number 4825 be adopted.
And seconded. We don't usually discuss since we've already had the vote on third. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. I'm now going to move number 10.5, bylaw number 4823. Councillor Ney, you've circulated a suggested motion. If you wish to read that motion, you're more than welcome to do so.
The first motion is that the third reading of the secondary suites parking facilities bylaw number 3540, 1986 amendment bylaw number 4823, 2022 be rescinded.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Moved and seconded. You better motivate on this one, because if it's not, you can just talk to the whole piece on this, on this motivation.
Okay. So what will follow is a motion to amend the bylaw to delete the requirement for on-site parking. And I do appreciate we've had this deliberation quite a few times at the table, but I have added a feature into this motion that would be part of the parking facilities bylaw that would also include the requirement to provide a level 1 110 volt charging for an electric vehicle. So what that does is it addresses the concern that has been expressed at the table that the on-site parking it can become an incentive for increased car use, but the electric charging feature would then create opportunities and incentivize electric car use, therefore contributing to a reduction in carbon emissions. So it's kind of introducing a component of the facilities bylaw that may make it justified to not require on-site parking. That's the rationale.
Thank you, Councillor Ney.
And to do that, of course, we need to rescind the bylaw before making them.
Okay, thank you. We have had discussion many times, so I don't want to rehash a lot of older arguments, but I'll go back. Go ahead, Councillor Green, and then Councillor Zelka.
Well, just very quickly, I have been consistently opposed to the off-street requirement, but this appears to be a reasonable compromise. It also speaks to climate change mitigation, and so I will support this this change. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Zelka.
I'm tempted to support it. However, I need to ask a question through you to staff, if I may, regarding how we will enforce the suggestion of the new E, where a plug must be installed, at least a level 1. I'm sure what plug needs to be installed. How would we enforce that, please?
Mr. Bull.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, it's something that we need to put some thoughts to on the face of what I think the text is suggesting at the moment that we're going to be looking at. It's a outdoor plug, and it's something that you can clearly identify, of course. I think there will be some questions down the road, well, how close does it need to be to the parking stalls? That's probably the main question, but it's not, it's something that staff would need to navigate if that's where council wanted to go. And I think that is a fairly straightforward requirement that staff could review, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bull. Anything else, Councillor Zelka?
So I appreciate staff hasn't really had a chance to sort of work through the process yet. And I agree it would need to be near some sort of a parking stall. Today we have situations where there are cars on the street near houses with extension cords extending across the sidewalks. Is the intention, I guess this would be an open question maybe for the mover, is the intention is to provide a mechanism to offset those plugs that are essentially being, how do I say this? Let's just say they're a side.
Does these changes address that issue? And I think the answer is no.
Yes,
Councillor Name?
Well, it would address it because it would be on the bill. I mean, it doesn't preclude that somebody could still put it across the crosswalk, but it wouldn't really make sense because the idea here would be that the outlet would be on the resident, but adjacent to the driveway. So the driver now has the ability, the resident now has the ability to drive the electric vehicle into the vicinity of the home, thus not needing to park the car on the road and stretch a cord across the sidewalk.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm just trying to avoid unintended consequences. You know, those wonderful 1912 houses that we have all over the place, these wonderful heritage homes, who didn't really consider cars or driveways at all. So we actually have quite a number of lovely heritage homes that have no driveways. That would be perfect to put a secondary suite in. If I may ask, what might either staff do or what might be considered with respect to this in terms of where this could be located? Thank you. With respect to the plug, for example.
I think we have to deal with the suggestion that's written in front of us, which is does it provide any guidelines for that?
Does it?
I don't believe it does at this point. But Councillor Ney or Mr. Bull, I'm happy to take any answer on that.
Yeah, no, I'd refer it to staff, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Bull, I don't see anything here that specifies the location to put you on the spot here.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm also joined by Ms. McDougall today, and I encourage her to jump in if she wants to, but it's a bit of a hard question at this point to answer. You know, if there were, I think, for when changes are made to an existing site, in this case a secondary suite, if it's an existing one, or to be added into this 1912 home, there would be an expectation to meet current zoning bylaw requirements for this new feature of the site. So we would need to figure out in that occasion, does the district require a driveway to be installed, or are there other solutions that achieve the goals of the bylaw? It would be simply just a secondary suite. We have to think twice about if a driveway is actually required or something else could be done to address this. Thank you.
Thank you. The last point I'd like to suggest is that maybe a friendly amendment on E, the page 2E, that it's something about being provided at least a level 1, as opposed to specifically a level 1. Because what if someone wanted to put in a level 2, or possibly even a level 3? I don't know whether that would be an appropriate suggestion, but we might get the situation where someone wants to put in a level 2, but not a level 1.
So right now the motion is just to rescind, so any changes would take to that.
Would we consider that?
We consider, if the motion to rescind passes and we decide to get into the wordsmithing of this thing, so then we'll get there. So, but we had to have a fulsome discussion of whether or not we're going to rescind, because rescinding and then going back doesn't make any sense. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks so much, and thanks for the time and energy put into this. Like Councillor Ney, or Councillor Green has voted against this motion or the parking bylaw all along. I voted for it because I think we've had a really great discussion and we've come up with some, to me, reasonable solutions around what we were looking for. I can't support this, and there's a couple of reasons why, and one goes to kind of what Councillor Zelka was talking about as far as the electric cords being spread out. That is a nightmare to me, but also that we'd have to remove the section 6 as well, to delete the scooter covered parking and charging. So I can't support it. I think we've spent a lot of time and energy and many hours discussing this already. I'm happy to move forward with it in its current state, so I will be voting against.
So I just need a motion to extend the meeting. We have, one of the members of council has indicated they have to leave at 9:30, so if I can get a motion to extend to 9:30, I think we should be able to deal with this at that time. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Is there any other? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I can support this motion to rescind. I think that the option presented in fact answers what I have asked through this whole process, and that is that we be able to accommodate the Clean BC roadmap to 2030, which requires accommodation for electric vehicles to encourage that use. So I think that this change gets to that point that I wanted to achieve, so I'm fine with rescinding and then adopting.
Thank you. I'm just going to speak on this then. So I don't support rescinding, and I think this comes back to the specifics of what's being proposed here. First off, I think the wording doesn't actually adequately achieve what I think we're all trying to achieve here, which is enforcing the necessity of a landlord to provide a secure, lockable space for an electric bicycle. We need to provide that infrastructure. If they don't require it, it won't get built. This does not require it. It requires a 110-volt outlet on the outside of a house. Every house has that. It doesn't mean it's secure. And if it's not secure, then it's not. We can't do it in a parking bylaw. The only place we can enforce building a secure lockup is through some other mechanism. The mechanism that we've so far agreed to, granted by a slim margin, has been to provide a mechanism whereby we say, provide a parking spot, which is was one of the key things that was raised by the public. They were concerned about parking, so we're saying provide a parking spot. However, with extremely ease, very small, 75% discount on the application fee, delegated authority to staff. All the landlord has to do is demonstrate a secure lockup. It just forces landlords to do the right thing, not defer it, not delay it, but just as part of their piece. It's very cheap, certainly a lot cheaper than a parking spot. It essentially forces them to do it. It's the only way that we can actually have the question came up on enforcement. How do we enforce this? This is the only way we can enforce that the landlords are providing the active transportation infrastructure in the way that we want it to. It's a very low overhead. It's all delegated to staff. It's so simple, and it just provides that mechanism. So I just would really encourage, we've had this debate multiple times. I appreciate the spirit with this is done. It seems it's very last minute coming in here. I just think let's move it forward. I would be very happy, frankly, to see a motion arising at the end of these that says, let's bring back in 2 years a report to see what is the impact of this and look at that, because I think that's an appropriate way of doing it. But I think we've gone through this debate at great length, and trying to make fine-tune adjustments about the wording it seems overkill for what we're trying to do. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yeah, I'll put my final 2 cents here on this. I appreciate the effort to reach a compromise on this issue, because why are we tying this to housing? We know there's a housing crisis. We know we've talked about housing options ad nauseum. This is a chance to actually do something meaningful and approve suites. I live in a 1937 bungalow with outdoor plugs, but no one is requiring me to provide safe, secure, covered parking for a bike or a car because I don't have a suite. I don't understand why we're doing it this way. I don't understand why we're being conditional about providing safe housing. I'm more concerned about providing safe shelter. I'm more concerned about providing safe housing for people who really need it. So I'm sorry, I don't know why we're doing this to people with suites. Other homeowners don't have to jump through these hoops. We don't even actively enforce the 2 off-street parking requirement for single-family dwellings in this municipality. So why are we targeting people with suites and tenants? So that, I am upset about it because I think it's wrong-headed and it's bad social policy, in my view.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Zelka, you want to add something else? I'm happy to call the question if we've.
A very quick question through you to staff. With respect to the possible off-street parking, the structure mentioned by the mayor that would need to be built, a secure covered location for the electric bike or electric scooter that would be built presumably off the side of the house. The question is, would this be included in floor area ratio, or would it not be included in floor area ratio since it's increasing the footprint of the house? I hope the answer is not included.
Through the Mayor, thank you, Councillor Zelka. This is a question for Ms. McDougall. She's a bit better up to speed into all the details on that front, so I hope she is available to chime in on this.
Thank you. Ms. McDougall? I'm assuming if it's inside the house, it's definitely included, but perhaps if it's an outdoor with a cover on it, can you give some clarification?
Yes, can you hear me? Is that all right? Are you able to hear me by any chance?
You're very quiet. We can't actually hear you. Your thing is lighting up, but we can't hear you in the room. Could you try again? You're not muted, but we can't hear you.
What about now? Can you hear me any better? I'm having some issues with my microphone.
Oh, yeah, there's an issue with your microphone. We just heard the last part of that. Could you just lean into it and speak as loudly as you can?
Okay, can you hear me all right now?
We can, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I unfortunately I don't have a specific answer for you because it really would depend on what the specific applicant was proposing. I think to err on the side of caution, I would say yes, it would be included most likely, but it depends on what specifically is being proposed, and I can't speak to that for every individual application, unfortunately.
Thank you. Is a shed included in the floor area ratio? Ms. McDougall? My understanding it is not.
No, that's correct.
So a rough equivalency here, I think, is probably fair. But go ahead, Councillor Zelka. Is that satisfactory or not?
Well, thank you. I appreciate the middle of the road answer there.
I'll go to Councillor Green or Nate and then Braithwaite again.
Just to speak to the motion that's on the table. I mean, the place this is coming from is that from my perspective, I've already articulated this at previous council meetings, is that I really don't see the value of requiring on-site parking. We've had a staff report that showed us very clearly that the vast majority of roads in this municipality have lots of room for occupation. There's very few streets that are congested, and there's a feature in this motion that would address that by a review in future. And the other component, the other piece to this, from my perspective, is that if we're on our way to moving this secondary suite bylaw in our community. And in my view, we need to do what we can to mitigate barriers for those who want to, renovate their homes to introduce a secondary suite. And the motion that's here in front of you aims to do just that. It's mitigated the barriers for the homeowner to renovate the suite. And I think that's important if we want an uptake of secondary suites in this community. So there's two parts that there's, in my view, no reason to incentivize parking spaces, because that incentivizes increased car use, and we have the room on our streets. And in my view, it's important to mitigate any barriers for the uptake of secondary suites in this community.
Thank you, Councillor Nate. Councillor Braithwaite, and I do want to get to a question here reasonably soon. Go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to reiterate that, I agree with you, Mayor, that I don't like to reword things on the fly. I think that we have had these discussions over the past few months. We came up with what was something that has been voted on and agreed to move ahead, although by a slim margin, yes, I know. I think that I agree that we should be mitigating barriers, but I also think that we also have to listen to residents. And residents spoke pretty strongly that they wanted off-street parking. I think what we have put in this is something that is doable for most people. And I think the mayor also has another good point that this can be revisited in 2 years. We can look at this again if we feel that or less, it can be revisited in less time. If we kind of go, you know what, this isn't working, let's then change it to something different. But so for me, I really hope that it stays in its current state, and that this does not get rescinded.
All right, so we have a motion to rescind third reading of sorry, I'm just going to make sure I get the bylaw correct here in my pieces, 4823 parking facilities bylaw. So that's the motion on the floor to rescind. All those in favor of rescinding? I have Councillor Patterson, nay. Oh, I don't have to read them out. Those opposed, Councillor Braithwaite and Murdoch opposed to rescind. So we have, do you want to make the motion that secondary streets bylaw, amendment bylaw be amended?
Yeah, as follows. Do you want me to all read out, Mr. Mayor, or how do you want to proceed?
So just clarification, because I know we amend. So would this procedurally go back? So we're at second reading now, so we're amending the piece, and then we'll do third reading again, and then it'll come. Does that then come back for another meeting for adoption? Is that how this works?
Your worship, that's correct, yes.
Okay.
This is a regulatory bylaw, and as such can't receive third reading and adoption on the same meeting.
Right, so we've done third readings. Okay, thank you. Unless there's a pandemic. Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Sorry, just some direction, Mr. Mayor. Do you want me to read the whole thing here?
Given nobody else at home can see this, really, I think we better, or if they're listening, can follow it. So I think you better read aloud what you're intending to do.
I just want to thank staff too for helping script this. So I appreciate that. It's a little bit technical, but so that secondary suites parking bylaw number 3540, 1986, amendment bylaw number 4823, 2022, be amended as follows. Section 4 is amended by deleting the proposed wording for a new bylaw, section 5.11, secondary suite parking not part of tandem arrangement, and section 5 is amended by deleting the proposed wording, one parking space for a secondary suite, and inserting the following. Add the following text to section A1 of Schedule A, zones RS1, RS2, RS3, RS4, RS5, and C1. Notwithstanding section A1A, no parking spaces are required for a secondary suite. And where a building contains a secondary suite, it must provide an outdoor labeled energized outlet capable of providing at least one level 110 volt charging for an electric vehicle, scooter, or bike. Section 6, Section 6, staff delegated approvals regarding bike, scooter, cover parking is deleted. And 3, that council, oh, okay, so that's a separate
sufficient.
one,
Yeah.
Okay.
And that secondary suites parking facilities, oh no, we're on second reading right
That's
now,
the
so
third.
we'd approve amendments and then we'd approve third reading. Okay, thank you for that. We've had a fairly good discussion, Councillor. A couple of people have indicated they might want to apply an amendment, but
I read it into just now, so I read into the
okay.
motion.
I didn't quite catch that. So where you reread it?
On E,
Yes, on E.
I read on the third line of providing at least a level 110 volt charging was inserted there. At least, so that, or at minimum a level 1, at minimum. Do you want a separate amendment to that? Right? That is what
No, that's what you read it. We'll take that as moved.
Yeah.
And there's a seconder? Moved and seconded, thank you. Is there any discussion on these? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, and apologies, I've got a little bit of an issue here. I appreciate the amendment, and I'm actually considering voting in favor. But I do have a question relating to the D, having to do with no parking spaces are required for secondary suite. Through you to staff, we still have an overriding number of parking spaces needed based on the total number of bedrooms in the house. I understand. As one of your staff could please say whether that would still apply in this case. Thank you.
Ms. McDougall, I think that's going to go to you.
Yes, that is correct, Your Worship. That number would still apply.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other discussion on this? Just wondering if there might be an amendment to just also include secure lockup or secure locking for it, because I think without a secure locking, it's not, nobody's going to have a bike. Just in the reality, when you have a multi-$1,000 e-bike, I don't think it's going to be there. So I'm going to throw it out there. If anybody wishes to add an amendment, I'll allow it. I'm not going to make one myself as the chair. Not seeing any interest, I will.
I'll make that amendment. I think it's important. So I'll amend to include a, I guess it's a lockable area. Oh, right. Yeah, we can use, yes, if I could just find it, Councillor Appleton. Hang on. Under section 6. Conditions. The owner of the lots in the application of a development variance permits and submitted plans and provisions of a secured location on the parcel for an electric bicycle or electric scooter complete with installed charging infrastructure.
A secured parcel on the, or secured lockup on the parcel. Just make sure I get the wording right before I ask for a seconder. So it must, where it says it must provide, it would say a secured lockup on the parcel providing, and then continue. So it's basically striking an outdoor and just say a secured park lockup on the parcel providing labeled energized outlet. Does that capture that? Is there a seconder for that? Seconded, thank you. Any discussion on that addition? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
With regret, I will not be able to support the amendment because this will impact not only the total floor area, the footprint aspect, because we can only go to a certain size, and many of our very large houses, or very old houses, are already at the limit, it seems. Plus, it'll potentially could be part of FAR, so I can't support this. Thank you.
Moved and seconded. Go ahead, Councillor Nay.
Yeah. And I appreciate the concern for the safety of these expensive vehicles, et cetera. But I think what you're trying to do is to address, ensure people do use the electric outlet. But I really don't think this is the way. I think people figure out how to keep their very expensive electric bikes safe. And my concern is this contributes further to providing yet another barrier to the installation of a secondary suite. I really think people figure out how to keep their expensive bikes safe, and I don't think we need to legislate that behavior in this instance.
Thank you, Councillor Nay. Any other discussion on the motion to amend? Don't see any. I will call the question. All those in favor of the amendment? And those opposed? Councillor Green, Appleton, Zelka, Nay, and Patterson. That amendment fails. So we're back to the main motion of adding those pieces, which is just to reiterate, as is on the screen there with that, so that amendment fails on the screen. And we're just back to the amendment as read, but just with clearly it says at least a level 1 as part of that, but otherwise as written. Any other discussion on this?
It was at minimum or at minimum?
Oh, sorry. You did say at least, but at minimum, level 1, okay. So, ready to call the question? So this is the revised changing. I will just as a person voting against the changes, I've already spoken my piece, but I just want to reiterate, I think, again, we're better off listening to the public on the need of the parking and be very clear that we're saying we're giving it up for a specific reason. We haven't made anything in this, if this amendment passes or this change passes. I think it leaves it too much in the air without providing the need for infrastructure. So I'll just reiterate my objection to the change, but I recognize the argument's already made. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you. Not to be difficult, but I remember the public hearing well because I checked, I did a running tally of the people who were supportive of secondary suites and supportive of of eliminating the requirement for off-street parking, and there was a majority. So, and I don't have it with me, unfortunately, it's at home, but I kept a running tally. So for what it's worth, at the public hearing at least, it reflected support for not requiring off-street parking.
Councillor Green, that is a fair assessment. I was referring more to the broad history of this issue in the community. I'm ready to call the question then. All those in favor? And those opposed? Councillor Braithwaite and Mayor Murdoch opposed. That carries, so that those changes be made, and I believe that there's a further motion that Council direct staff.
And I'm going to make an amendment to this as well, given what's read, and I'm going to move it to 2 years and see if there's support for that. But that Council directs staff to undertake a policy review 2 years after the bylaws allowing for secondary suites have been adopted to report back on number of permits issued, ease of implementation, possible impacts to on-street parking, and additional policy considerations.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Just asking for a report back in 2 years. I think it's pretty straightforward, Councillor Nay. Yeah. Any discussion on that? I'll just ask if people have objections. We can hear the arguments against it. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
I'm sorry, I'm reading it.
Oh, okay. We'll just.
Can I motivate, or is it?
I think if nobody's going to object, then we'll just move it on here in terms of the meeting. I don't see anybody raising hands with questions or objections, so I'm going to call this. Is it moved? Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion? I think I already called the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? And then you had. Yeah, you just need to move this. So as amended, can we move this a third time? So we'll just, if you can read that last one. Yeah.
Okay, the secondary suites parking facilities bylaw number 3540, 1986 amendment bylaw number 4823, 2022 be read a third time as amended.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Braithwaite and Mayor Murdoch opposed. That carries. That concludes 10.5. We are back to 10.2, the driveway access amendment bylaw. And so perhaps we can, before we get to move adoption.
I'll move that the driveway access amendment bylaw 2022 number 4826 be adopted.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I think that my understanding is if we did what we just did for the parking facility, that this now becomes redundant. Yeah.
So, Mr. Bull, perhaps you can just weigh on that piece.
Yes, through the mayor, that's correct. The driveway access bylaw parking would be required because the amendment really is about allowing for a wider driveway. So when we were looking earlier today at these possible changes, so the bylaw specifically said that when a proposed driveway access would provide access to a parcel of land with a secondary suite, may be developed with greater, and that is meant to facilitate access to off-street parking stalls. The question is, without additional stalls required, maybe that this particular bylaw amendment is not needed.
Thank you for that. The only piece I would just add to this, though, is that when this was discussed, there was some, as I recall, some discussion from the engineering group that there was a number of occasions where these things crept up, where they would like to have some delegated authority to deal with those one-off situations. So they took the opportunity at this time to make those modifications. Perhaps you could speak to that, Mr. Bull.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think you're already providing the recap, but I was wondering if Ms. McDougall has more background on that, having been involved in it throughout the process.
Trying to make sure I understand what the process would be if we can rescind the whole piece or we can make amendments. I'm just, if you don't mind, Councillor Zelka, I'm just going to get that answer and then we can decide what we want to do with it. Ms. McDougall, and this is one that we could frankly leave to another meeting as well if we needed that clarification, since engineering isn't here. So, but if Ms. McDougall has the answer, perhaps we can deal with that.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. In this instance, the way the wording that's proposed in the driveway access bylaw, as currently presented, really relates to the other set of regulations that were proposed originally in the parking facilities bylaw. So it's specific to a secondary suite, instances where a parking space was going to be required. We were trying to give some flexibility to ensure that there wouldn't have to be tandem parking situations. But now that we are pursuing a path where no parking will be required, the tandem aspect of this and widening the driveway access width is really not relevant. Whether the engineering department would like some flexibility there, yes, I think that's accurate, but I think we would need to rework the wording in this bylaw. As it's currently proposed, it wouldn't give them any flexibility that they're probably looking for, given the other bylaws that are being discussed now.
Thank you. Can you give us any direction on this one? Because I think there's two options here. We can just move it and vote it down. It'll come back in a different way, or we could refer it back to staff and have it come back here with some words, some suggested revised wording. If it's got some value, and I think it was brought forward by staff because they saw it had value, then I think it might be worth just moving it forward with some changes. But I'll just take your advice on that. Mr. Bull?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, with this bylaw, let me see, it is setting at third reading, so Council could also, along the lines of what you're summarizing, ask us a question, and maybe consideration of this bylaw is delayed to a future meeting, and it would give us a chance to circle back to our fellow staff, get some information, and possibly even, if it's possible, next week, this particular bylaw could come back.
All right, thank you. And referral would be to staff or to the future meeting for staff input on answering the questions?
Mayor Murdoch, through you, it would be to staff.
Okay, thank you.
So moved, Your
Okay, so
Worship.
the motion to refer back to staff. Thank you. Moved and seconded. I think we're pretty clear on this. Really just for the sake of understanding if this is something that staff see as valuable in the broader operational pieces or not. Thank you. I don't see any discussion. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. And sorry, I'm just going through, make sure don't miss anything. So we've got 10.1, 10.5, 10.2. We're at the 10.3, which is bylaw 4827 for adoption.
I'll move that the Building and Plumbing Amendment Bylaw 2022 number 4827 be adopted.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. And then we have 4824.
I'll move that the Land Use Procedures and Fees Bylaw 2022 number 4824 be adopted.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you for that. Good. Yay. Through that. But before we can celebrate or anything else, I need to move on to the items. Oh, sorry. Now I've been doing this with paper, and now I am. So just give me a second here to get to my proper spot on my agenda, so I don't miss any of my notes. And of course, I mix them all up. Here we go. So we're back to 11. We have a notice of motion. You don't have to read it in. It's on the record, Councillor Ney, for consideration next week. So those are motions as they will come back next week. Item number 12.1, we have the crossing guard services funding. We got 5 minutes left. Perhaps we can deal with this. We have Mr. Payne on the thing. There's no staff report attached to this, so perhaps Mr. Payne, you can give us a brief overview of the current funding level. And the wording in the letter seems to indicate they were just asking for a specific amount for the coming years, but perhaps you can give us a bit of clarity and what the and what's in the budget currently for this service.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Currently, there's approximately, I believe, $13,000 in the budget for crossing guard services. So this request would increase it to $22,500, approximately a $10,000 increase.
Thank you very much for that. So we have this in front. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Just a very quick question. Is there potential to impact our tax rate at the moment or not? Thank you.
Mr. Payne, that's probably a question for you. I guess this is
Your
a
worship,
multi-year.
yeah, Your Worship, this would increase our taxes for next year by $10,000, which is a third of a percent, or yeah, 0.03% of a tax increase.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I fully in support of what this is requesting, what it's trying to achieve. But I note that there's been correspondence back and forth between both that the school districts communicated both with the City of Victoria and the City of Sandwich, and with the District of Sandwich, excuse me, and they've come, and both those groups have come back to the school board asking for sort of discussions about long-term implementation. And so it seems to me that I'm fully in support of contributing towards the cost, but I'm feeling like I need a little bit of analysis compared on what it seems to be that each council is determining their way forward individually, whereas of course this is the school district. So I'm wondering whether it's possible, and I don't want to put staff on the spot, but I'm wondering whether it's possible to request an analysis from staff of how the other municipalities in the school district are responding to this. Can we synchronize and can we coordinate our response in some way?
Mr. Payne, I think that would require a motion to just ask staff to come back next week with a report on what other districts are doing with this increased request. But Mr. Payne, is that something that we could undertake for next week?
Your Worship, yeah, just depending on staff availability in other municipalities. Certainly, we have the capacity to get that done for next week, so long as we can collect the responses in time.
And then the second part of the question is, do we want to do that now, or do we want to look at just dealing with this now and looking at that as a future piece of discussion? It'll be the sort of two paths forward I could see. But go ahead, Councillor Appleton, you still have the floor.
I think I would be willing to fund the requested cost at this stage of the game, Your Worship, and potentially, but for with the emphasis that it be just for this upcoming year, and then request the analysis from staff as to reach out to adjacent municipalities to coordinate a response for the future. It seems to me that the Crossing Guard Association ceasing services, as has been identified here, leaves a bit of a question mark as to what the long-term sustainable model for the service is.
So your preference is to, okay, so there's no, so I'm just going to try and interpret that as a motion, if that's okay.
I can clarify, Your Worship. So
Please
I would move firstly that the District of Oak Bay.
Actually, I'm going to have to interrupt you because if we want to have this, we've got to just extend the meeting for another 10 minutes to 9:40. Motion to 9:40. Discussion. I know somebody may have to leave here. If they can stay, that'd be great. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. We'll carry it on.
So I would firstly make a motion, Your Worship, that the district allocate $22,560 for the 2022-2023 school year to Crossing Guard services and indicate such to School District 61.
Thank you. I've got to move for a second, but just for my clarification, Mr. Payne, would this be, because our budgets are different than the school districts, would this be for us for the 2023 budget year?
Yes, Your Worship. I was just thinking the same thing. Essentially, I would interpret the motion as it stands on the table to fund this increased funding for September through December, which would include part of the request. And then I would just put in full year funding for next year. So it's almost like a year and a quarter worth of funding, but that would allow us time to synchronize that information that's being requested.
Okay, thank you. I think that's clear enough. Anything else you want to add, Councillor Appleton? Councillor Green?
Yes, and I'll be really brief. I agree with Councillor Appleton, and I will support the motion. But again, this speaks to a broader issue around active transportation planning and public safety and health. So, and with the school district, some kind of conversation about how this is going to impact all of us. So I think it's an important thing to refer it back to staff for a further analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Any other discussion? I'll speak on this. I'll support the motion. I think this ask was $9,360 in 2016, 2017. It's now $23,000 and change, $22,000 and change. And we have a situation where the applicant controls all the costs and the service level models and everything else and has no cost to pay for it. So the incentive in these situations, and not to, there's nothing negative here about the school district, is of course you want to increase service levels because there's zero cost to you. And I think we have to find some model here where we can be a participant but not also perhaps have a say in the service or share the cost so that we all understand that. So that's my observation of this. I'm supportive of funding it at this point. I know that they're in a bit of a crunch, but I don't think this is the right model moving forward. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
And perhaps on that, Mayor, it might behoove us to put something in writing like that to the school board to basically say, we're funding this time, but in the future, this is not a given that we will fund it at the full amount. We would like to look at some sort of a partnership.
I think we'll do that, but I think maybe if we need a motion to amend it as well, we can just add and to reach out to the school district to establish, to discuss the future funding program. Councillor Appleton.
As the mover of the motion, Your Worship, I would consider that a friendly amendment, that message be delivered to the school board at the same time that the funding is allocated.
Great, thank you. Moved and seconded. The seconder is okay with that? Okay. So we have an amended motion, which is basically to approve the funding, but reach it for this 1 year, or 1.25 years, and then, but also to reach out as part of that. So, okay, that's the motion. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? New business?
Thank you very much. I'll be very, very brief. I've already provided staff with the wording of this notice of motion I'm reading into the record. Be resolved that the District of Oak Bay find a way to allow all students associated with Oak Bay be eligible for nomination to the Yes Awards that are currently awarded by the Oak Bay Yes Awards Committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I don't know if that's necessary, but we can certainly work on the pieces on that, as I see if that's a piece. It's been sort of moved a little bit off of the official committee books, I believe, but we can just have a look at that. Any other new business before I call adjournment? No. All those in favor? Oh, I need a motion to adjourn. Moved and second. I just jumped the gun there. Look at me. I'm just waiting just so eager to get out of here. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. We're out of here. And thank you, everybody, for the discussion on particularly on the suites. It's really nice to close that off this term. And I appreciate being able to disagree on the details and agree on the goals with all of you. It's a real honor to work with you. So thank you.